Today, I explored the entire map of GTA 5 and found out how Rockstar turned California into the state of San Andreas. We started off our journey of exploring around San Andreas by going to the Land Act Reservoir, which is right outside the Los Santos area, and the Land Act Reservoir is based on a real-life reservoir in the Los Angeles area, more close to like Pasadena, so not necessarily like in Los Angeles itself, but kind of in the area here. I do think this reservoir is somewhat interesting to look at and kind of compare to real life, because it does seem like the reservoir has not that much water in it. You can see kind of a little bit of this exposed land here, and there's actually like animals there as well. So it doesn't seem like the reservoir is fully full. Like, it should be up a lot higher. And this is kind of like a classic thing that happens in California, where you have these years of extreme drought and then the reservoirs go down a ton. And then you'll have these years that are like the exact opposite, where they just get filled up all the way to the brim. And it just like kind of oscillates between those, where you go from one year with extreme drought and then the next year you have like insane amount of rain. And that's why like California really needs these reservoirs here. And a lot of times it is because of how California gets its water, where there's certain places in the state that get a ton of water and there are certain places that are deserts, one of them being Los Angeles / Los Santos in the game. So this is why they need a bunch of reservoirs, because they basically pump a lot of the water down from Northern California into Southern California to kind of feed the people in Los Angeles, which is just a really interesting thing. And you guys should definitely check out how Los Angeles got a lot of its water, because there are some really interesting things, especially the movie Chinatown kind of goes over a lot of that. But there are a lot of really interesting like political decisions that went into how Los Angeles actually got its water. So either way, this isn't really all that interesting of a location in the game, but I do think it kind of plays into a lot of cool things in real life. I then went all the way up to the top of the mountains here, and this is actually a pretty cool like a mountain range here, because even though it isn't even close to like one of the tallest mountains in the entire game, you can see all the way out to the Noose headquarters over here that we'll be checking out very soon. And then you can also see like all the way out into Los Santos and a lot of these other areas, which I just think is kind of cool. Like, you can go to these mountains that aren't really all that tall, and you can see all the way to like the wind farms, like the area out there. And then you can also see like all the way into Los Santos and all these huge buildings here, which just does make some of these mountains that are right by Los Santos a lot cooler than something like Mount Chiliad. Well, although Mount Chiliad is really cool, it's just so tall and away from everything that it kind of feels a little bit less divorced. You kind of get less cool views than something like this. I then went down to the highway here and started to go over to the news facility here. And the news facility is kind of a weird place for me, because it's kind of like on the outskirts of Los Santos, which again does kind of make sense for a building like this. A lot of these governmental buildings in the game are kind of like very far away from everything else. So it does kind of make sense in that sense, but there are a lot of weird things about this. Like, in the game itself, like Los Santos doesn't really have any actual suburbs. Like, most of the time the people that are, using this building would be in the suburbs. So it just feels a little bit weird that you'd have like a huge building like this that is far away from Los Santos, where it's like people are commuting from Los Santos to go to somewhere outside of the city. That just doesn't really make a ton of sense when you think about like real people. And real people obviously are going to commute to their jobs, but they're not going to live in Los Santos and pay extra money for their jobs just to commute somewhere outside of the city. So it probably would make a little bit more sense to have some sort of like, I don't know, building here, or some place for like people to actually live, like some sort of apartments over here, because there just aren't really any actual suburbs in GTA, which is a weird thing, because American suburbs are like some of the most like widespread things in America, and there just aren't any in any of the GTA games, because they're kind of like all condensing all these cities into one thing, and then you have like little towns, but you don't really have these like suburbs that aren't real towns. But either way, I mean, the news building is like kind of cool to see. I mean, it's nice to see that there is like a real headquarters, but it isn't really all that interesting. I then started heading up the freeway and into this area where you have a little bit of a stop on the side of the road, where you can go to the 24/7 or the chicken shop or get gas here. And again, these are some pretty common things in California, where you do have a lot of these on I-5, which is kind of like the main highway going between Northern and Southern California that you can go on. And there are a lot of these little stops there, because there are a lot of like towns there that aren't really like real towns. Like, there are two freeways that kind of go up the middle of California, and one of them doesn't really have any major towns on it, and the other one does have like Fresno and Bakersfield and all the other ones, and I-5 doesn't have any major towns on it. So there are a lot of areas like this, and it does do a pretty good job of kind of like representing these small areas, but it is like kind of in the weirdest spot, where you have to like leave the freeway from the left, and then the rest stop is like in the middle of the freeway, which just seems a little weird. Like, why would you have the rest stop in the middle of the freeway and not like on one of the sides of the freeways so both sides can get off and go onto it? I don't know, just a really weird positioning for that. I guess it was probably just something that Rockstar had to add because they didn't have enough space on either side, because they have like the railroad tracks over here, and they just had a lot of other things that they had to put as well in this area, and they just didn't have enough land to put the rest stop like on one of the sides because you have these railroad tracks here. So it just seems like kind of a weird spot. But now you get to look at these beautiful water here and all the islands, which is pretty cool. I mean, this area just is extremely beautiful where you get to look at all these islands. It just does, kind of make me a little bit mad necessarily that you can't really do anything on the islands. Like, the one thing about GTA 5 that I do think is really like letting down when you look around the game is that there's just not that much to do outside of like the main couple things. Like, now heading over to this power plant here, like, this is a huge area and there's just not that much going on at this power plant that's actually like interesting for the regular person to go and check it out, besides like the fact that there's a huge power plant here. And this power station here, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be an oil refinery. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't gone up close and looked at a ton of oil refineries, but this generally looks like an oil refinery. And there are a lot of oil refineries in Southern California, so this being around the area around Los Santos does make a lot of sense, because in Los Angeles there are a lot of oil refineries that are refining the oil that they suck up, and they have all these boats that come and they have to like park them outside, and they have like little pipelines that they suck the oil from, where the things are just way outside, which is pretty cool. And I mean, it looks like an oil refinery here because this seems to be owned by one of the oil companies in game. And there aren't really a ton of oil refineries in California anymore. So in San Andreas, I'd assume that these are kind of like shrinking, and this might be the only one on the entire map. And that's kind of why a lot of Californians have to pay higher prices at the gas, because they don't really have a lot of capacity to refine oil, and they instead have to import it from a lot of other sources, which is a pretty interesting thing here. And then over into this area, you have all these wind turbines. This is the wind farm. So it's kind of interesting that you have like the oil refinery and the wind farm right next to each other. This wind farm, I'm assuming, is based off of like maybe a Palm Springs wind farm. There are a bunch of different wind farms all over California, so it's probably just based off of one of a couple of them. And it is interesting that some of the turbines here aren't spinning, because like, of course, this is a thing where if there is no wind, they're not going to be spinning. But I don't know if there's like a specific reason why any of them aren't spinning, or they just have certain ones in the game that just don't spin at all, because like always there's going to be some wind turbines that aren't spinning because there's just not enough wind power to power them, which is one of the bad things about using wind turbines. Like, they're not always on, at least in comparison to a lot of the other things. I guess that's just the thing with renewable power. They're not always on, and it's not like you can always have them on at all times, because renewable things can't be done throughout the day. Like, the solar panels are only going to work when the sun's out. The wind turbines are only going to work when there's wind out. I mean, most of the renewable sources of energy aren't really all that you can use them all the time, because they have like a specific thing that turns them on and gets them going, which is cool. But it's like, obviously you want something that can be consistent at all times, and that's why you need something like nuclear to kind of supplant that, because you can have that used during the times when you can't use the renewable energy sources. And the wind turbine is kind of cool here. It's kind of cool to just kind of drive under all these, but there's not really that much going on. Again, I just feel like there's so many areas in the game in GTA 5 that are so cool to look at, and you see like this plane coming. I thought this plane was gonna get hit by one of the wind turbines, but it did survive somehow. But there's so many different areas that I feel like are extremely cool to go and visit, because they have all these major structures and they feel so realistic and like real life. And just in the actual game itself, I feel like they're not used all that well. Of course, they are used in like GTA Online, and there are things to do here, but they just don't really feel as like real as like doing something in Red Dead Redemption 2, where now in Red Dead Redemption 2, it just feels like every single area is somewhat populated and there are things going on in the entire map. And that's why I hope for GTA 6 for the entire map to at least feel like a real place, and not just kind of like set dressing and just emptiness to not really feel like a real place. Because GTA 5 does have a lot of cool things going on, but everything just feels empty and not really like real people are living there. So it does work out enough. But now we'll head into the penitentiary. And now we're in Bolingbroke Penitentiary. This is mainly known as the place that Brad is supposed to be in GTA 5, and where Trevor is like talking to Brad technically at the penitentiary here, and where Trevor might eventually break Brad out if he did have the time and if Brad was actually alive. And it does kind of remind me of the prison in Red Dead Redemption 2. Like, I feel like it's very similar looking to that. I mean, obviously prisons are going to be looking pretty similar, so it does make sense that it looks similar. And of course I couldn't get in here without any cheats. I just had to put myself in here. All these guys are getting mad at me. They all would attack you if you were in here without cheats and if you didn't have these like guys ignoring you. So it is kind of an interesting area, and it is funny that like even places like this where you can't go into as a normal person, like obviously you could like see through the side of it, but you can't go into it as a normal person. And even in here they still have so many different NPCs that are going around. It's just like, who is actually using these NPCs or like looking at these NPCs? Like, no one actually cares about these NPCs except for Rockstar, and Rockstar still kept it in here because they wanted to make the game more realistic, which is just such a funny thing to me. And even now, like, I was kind of glitching out and there's some weird stuff going on. I feel like this is just not the place where you're supposed to go in the actual game. So just some weird stuff was happening while I was exploring around this area. I don't know necessarily what was going on. And then all these guys are just running around because you're not supposed to actually be in here as a real guy. So there was just pandemonium happening all over. People were shooting at me. People were doing a lot of weird things to me. And even when you have the cheats on, like I have God mode on and was not getting shot by, or like was not dying when I was getting shot by these people, but there's just not that much in this building that is all that interesting. And it is funny that they have like all these things for people to play around in the yard, but it just seems a little weird now to place. Like you have the basketball hoops and there's no actual basketball hoops there. And then there's just like other things that feel like, again, it makes it more realistic as a penitentiary, where these are the things that probably are in a penitentiary. And it feels very realistic to what a penitentiary might be in real life. I mean, I haven't been on the inside of a penitentiary all that many times, but I think it just like, it looks relatively similar to what a penitentiary would actually look like. But again, no one's going to be in here. And I think that's one of the things that I hope they do in GTA 6, where it's like, again, they need to use every single location that you make, because these are all super cool locations that you can check out. And like, at least if you had something that was like in this area that you could do and you could just have some sort of fun exploring all the locations, it would make it so much better to explore around the map, because it'd be interesting to go to these places and maybe you have like some way to get into the penitentiary and you can like sneak around and do things in the penitentiary, and then you have to like avoid being shot at the penitentiary. It just would make it a lot more interesting. But again, I do know the GTA 6, they have a specific penitentiary that you're getting Lucia out of, and you probably at least have some missions that are going to go on there. So it does seem like in GTA 6 they maybe have added a little bit more to the penitentiaries here, but just some of the locations in GTA 5, they just don't really feel that realistic, even if they are extremely realistic, because there's just nothing going on there. And now, leaving the penitentiary, we get to head out into the kind of Sandy Shores area. This is really the desert area of the map here, and we get to pass by all of these satellites, I think. I don't really know what they are. They kind of remind me of the movie Contact, where they're sending out stuff to the aliens here. I don't know, maybe they're contacting the aliens with these. But now we're heading over to Harmony first, and then coming back to Sandy Shores, just because Sandy Shores I do think is a little bit more interesting than Harmony. Harmony really is not the coolest town to visit. But now we skip over and finally get to the Harmony area. Harmony really just feels like a kind of like truck stop where, you know, some people are living, but it's not a place that like real people live. It's kind of like an NPC town. And honestly, it doesn't really seem like Harmony's doing all that well. You have these people who are selling RVs here. It seems like a lot of these people just aren't really doing that well. The stores don't really seem to be in the best condition. Like even this gas station here seems a bit rusted and a bit run down. Not like a ton of people are using it and, you know, staying here during this time period, which again makes a lot of sense. A lot of these towns that are like on the side of the highways here aren't having a lot of business here besides the people that are kind of stopping at it for a little bit of time. But they do have a bank here. They do have some other shops. I just don't really think the shops are all that interesting. I mean, you have the Fleeca Bank here, the Liquor Barn. It just kind of reminds me of like a mashup of a small town where they're trying to kind of represent a small town here and then also kind of represent a interstate route going right through the area. So you have like the place like the motel, and then you kind of have this like degrading small town feel in the rest of the area with these like cafes and the gas stations. And then you also just have all these buildings feeling a little bit rusted and lived in, and not like people are coming back to this area, which is a kind of classic thing right now. A lot of the small towns in America and in the entire world are getting moved away from, just because as a young person there aren't really any jobs that you can have in the small areas, and if you just stay in the larger areas you're much more likely to get a job here. You also have these signs here which say impeach the socialist, which is kind of funny. It reminds me of a lot of the signs on I-5 that you can get that say like Newsom, stop wasting our damn water, and it's like DAM water. And it's just the funniest thing to me, because like all these farmers in there think that they deserve the entire water from the Colorado River. It's like, bro, we need some water to go to the ocean. Like that's how the river has worked for thousands of years. It's not like you can just suck out all the water from the river. It just is kind of a weird thing here. And then now you have like this taco area and kind of all these big box stores. So it's kind of just a weird area where it kind of just seems this, like this mashup of like a small town that's not really doing that much, and then like all these areas that have like the big box retailers and kind of like a stop away town on the big highway here. And then to the right we have like these oil derricks, and then I don't know, there's just so much going on in this area that just seems weird to kind of classify it as one area. There's just a lot of different things that are kind of happening in Harmony, where it just doesn't really seem like a town with a specific identity. It just seems like there are a lot of different identities that are kind of moved into one thing, like this dollar pills area. All these things, they remind you of more of like an outlet store or an outlet area. And then you have like this liquor store, which reminds you of like a really small town which has one liquor store, and they just all go to this liquor store. And then over here you have like the 7-Eleven, which is kind of more feeling like a place that you just stop when you go and visit the area. And then actually like visiting the town itself, you have a lot of these RVs and just a lot of these houses that just don't really look all that amazing. I mean, seeming like people definitely live in these houses, but there's not that much going on. And then all the way up at the top of this hill here, you can find the radio station, which is called Rebel Radio Station. And I guess this is just spreading a lot of, things to the rest of the area. They're spreading the radio waves, and just, I don't know, maybe this is like a little bit of a job driver in the area where you can work at the radio station and live in Harmony where no one else wants to live. The next place I visited was the Redwood Lights track, which is a mix of a construction site and a motocross track, which is kind of cool. I mean, it's nice that you have like something that can both be a construction site in the actual game and be used for something like as well, like a motocross track, which I do think is pretty cool. And you can see that people are actually doing construction here as well. And I just kind of wonder why there isn't anything else to do here. Like, it's just kind of funny, similarly with all the things where like in online, the game technically is like progressing day and night, and you actually have like years going by, but then all these construction sites just can't fully be finished because they have things that you have to do in online, and you can't like fully put them up to the actual day. So you have to have some kind of lore reason why the construction has gone on here for so long. And they do seem to be doing a solid enough job. I'm just kind of wondering what they're constructing here. Like, are they constructing an actual track here, or are they constructing something else? Like, I don't really know what's going on. I guess it could be something else, but I don't really know what they'd be making here, because it doesn't really seem like a lot of people want to live in the Harmony area, even if they are building something cool. Maybe it's like a refinery or some sort of like industrial thing. But eventually I had to get out of my car because my car got stuck while I was trying to go around the track, which was just really weird. Like, I don't understand how I can get stuck. It's just so weird how you can get stuck in just certain places with the car. But I eventually got out and had to explore around the track itself. I then went back over to Harmony to check out the rest of the town. It doesn't really seem like there's much of a community here. It just seems like they kind of just like splatted down a bunch of houses and RVs here, which are all extremely rusted. It doesn't really seem like there's a lot of investment in the towns here. Everything seems to be pretty rusted and not like people actually want to live here, which just does suck, because the thing about a town is like you really do need investment. You still need young people coming in to keep it up, and that's why a lot of towns now are really feeling that they have no investment and are kind of becoming these ghost towns because no one wants to move into a lot of these places as a young person, because you'd rather just live in a city where you can have a lot more investment and you can make way more money in a big city rather than just staying in the country. I then visited the cement works in this area, and again, there's a lot of these industrial things in this area right around Harmony and Sandy Shores, but it does seem like these ones are kind of going out of repair. Like even this one is pretty rusted down. Doesn't seem like a ton of people are working on it. And then right next to it, you have this kind of like weird like RV park over here as well. I don't know what these people are up to. Maybe they work at some of these like oil derricks, or they work at the cement works as well, but it just seems like these people are not doing all that well. They do have their own little community out here though, and you also have all these different oil derricks, and very similarly to Los Angeles, there are just always a lot of oil derricks around California. California is one of the most oil-rich areas, at least it was for a time period. It's not really anymore, but there still is a lot of like oil derricks in the Bakersfield area, and there still are a lot of big oil fields in those areas as well. So if you do go around those areas, which I'm assuming this area is kind of based off of the Bakersfield area, you can find a lot of these oil derricks here. So it does represent real life pretty well, but it's just so funny how many different like industries are in this area. You have the wind farms, you have the cement works, you have like the penitentiary. You just have all these different like weird industrial things where you should have a lot of workers in this area, but it just doesn't really seem like there are as many workers to support these areas, or at least like Sandy Shores doesn't really feel like it has enough people to support all these different industries. And then going to this area, I guess these people are working on this boat. I don't know if they're living in the boat. That was one of the things that I was thinking, like, are they living in this boat? Because they live in like RVs, so living in a boat wouldn't be all that crazy if you did turn it into a house, but it doesn't really seem like it. And then I went all the way over to the railroad, and eventually I'm gonna go over to Stab City. And Stab City, I feel like, is again one of the weirder places that you can visit in the entire game, because it really just feels like all these things kind of combined into one. It's an RV park ran by the Lost and Damned biker gang, and it just seems like kind of the worst possible area in this entire area. And there are some bad areas, like Sandy Shores is also not the greatest place to live, but Stab City is a place that is called Stab City for how violent it gets. And the fact that you have, you know, a lot of these people in here are all on drugs and not really doing the best of things. It just doesn't really seem like a place that you'd want to live as a normal person. But you can see all the way up to Mount Chiliad though, so there are some nice views in this area. I don't really think the location's all that bad, but the fact that it used to be called Sunset Shores and now it's called Stab City doesn't really make it feel like it's the one of the best places that I want to live in this area. And I just don't know if I'd want to live in an RV park with a bunch of drugged out biker members there, because that just doesn't really seem all that interesting to me. And then going over here, you also have, I think, some more, like, I don't really know what these are. I don't know if these are water tanks. I'd assume they're water tanks just because there's not really any other connection to them, but you get some water tanks here that are also kind of have some interesting paintings on them, which I think is kind of cool, but there's not really that much else in this area. So now we're going to be heading over to Sandy Shores. And now finally getting to visit Sandy Shores. Sandy Shores is pretty interesting because it definitely is the nicest out of all these terrible towns in this Inland Bay area. This entire Inland Bay area, I believe, is based off of the Salton Sea in California, which is kind of like the area around Coachella, but it's like way closer to the actual sea here. And it used to be like a farming community, and now it has been taken over by a lot of these people that are using drugs and just are not really in the best of scenarios, because people have moved away from those areas as they became a lot less nice, and the sea itself started to evaporate. So then there's like salt and there's all these noxious gases that you could get from the area, so they had to leave the area. So it wasn't really the nicest place to live, and that's kind of what like Sandy Shores is based on here. It's an area that used to be a big vacation place in like the 1920s, I believe the Salton Sea was used. So like this area probably was used as a vacation place in the actual like San Andreas, you know, lore of GTA here. But again, it seems like a lot of people have moved away because this area just doesn't really seem to be doing that well. There's a lot of abandoned buildings, just a lot of things that seem like they aren't really kept into that much of niceness. Like that area right there, like, are these buildings abandoned? I don't know. Maybe they're not, but like they don't really seem to be doing all that well. Like this place is for sure abandoned, and I mean, even if you have people outside of it, it just doesn't really seem like, I mean, like, look at that. There's a liquor store sign and there's no liquor store right there. So all these places were likely places that had stores and had things going on. And all of them have been demolished in this area or abandoned. And then the rest of Sandy Shores here does still seem to be going, but there still are a lot more abandoned buildings. Like here's an abandoned RV, and just this area doesn't seem to have basically any investment since all these people moved away and they took all their vacation dollars. And that's the one bad thing about being like a vacation destination in, life, where if it stops becoming as good of a vacation destination, a lot of the money dries up and then you can't support yourself here. I mean, look at this liquor store. This looks like an absolutely disgusting place to go into. And just in general, Sandy Shores is not the best place where I'd want to live. Even though you can get some like nicer houses, you could probably get a good amount of space, but it just doesn't really seem like your neighbors would be the nicest people, and they definitely probably be a little bit drugged out in this area. I mean, look at this right here. You have the RV on the bottom and then you have like a deck on top. Like people are just putting their RVs here and just saying, that's my house and that's how I'm going to live, which I do really respect. I just don't really think this is a place that's all that interesting. And this is probably something from the time that Sandy Shores was an actual vacation area, and it just has been left here because they've actually repurposed it. But it seems like the majority of the buildings that were from that time period are either destroyed and now replaced by like RV homes, or they just are abandoned here, like this building right here. And there's so many different abandoned places. Even this motel here on the right, like look at all these abandoned homes, but you have this huge motel that probably used to be a pop-in vacation spot and now is just fully abandoned, as no one wants to go to Sandy Shores anymore. Maybe they want to stay away from Trevor, which does make sense. Trevor is a pretty bad person, but also when you have like the biker gangs in the area and just all this violence and all this rampaginess, and then there's just nothing interesting in this area that you like want to go see as a normal person, it just makes sense that a lot of people would leave this area. As you move east into Sandy Shores, there are some like regular old buildings. Like here you have the fire station, and it does seem like if you work at the fire station, maybe you can have at least a solid paying job in Sandy Shores. There's some other things that seem to be open as well, but it still doesn't seem like there's a ton of things going on in Sandy Shores. You also have the medical center as well. These are probably the two best places to like get a job here. So if you are someone who is like born in Sandy Shores, you probably either need to go to the fire station or the medical center. And if you can't get a job at either of those two places, you probably should just leave, because there's just not that much going on in Sandy Shores. Like obviously you could work at one of these smaller stores or like the 7-Eleven 24/7 place here, but it just doesn't really seem like it's the greatest place to spend your time. And like honestly, if you're a young person, you probably should just leave, because the people in this area are not the greatest. I mean, you'd have to live with Trevor Phillips, who is in this RV and is just hanging out and chilling. And I don't know if this is just a me thing, but it seems like there are a ton of different like liquor stores or bars that you can go to in this area. I don't know if that's just a common thing in these neighborhoods, or if there's like a specific reason why Rockstar wanted to put a bunch of different liquor stores in these areas. I guess these do seem like one of the few things that probably is going to stay here and like actually have a profitable business for these people. Also, it is a common thing that like liquor stores and a lot of these things that kind of prey on poor people will be in poor neighborhoods. Like in poor neighborhoods, you have a lot more liquor stores, a lot more like gambling things, and you just have a lot more of these things that kind of prey on the poor people. This is also a pretty cool building right here. I mean, you kind of have like this windmill going on, but like even the cool buildings are all abandoned in Sandy Shores. I just think Sandy Shores in general doesn't seem like the best place to live. You also have so many different abandoned lots, and it doesn't seem like anyone wants to invest in this community. It's just not really a cool place to live, and it just seems so run down, and like everyone has left this area because no one wants to invest into this area. And now leaving Sandy Shores and heading over towards the airport here. The airport is also probably one of the more valuable things that they have in Sandy Shores, but again, it's like a Trevor Phillips Enterprise thing, and it's like something that Trevor does, so it's not really a beneficial thing to the whole community because they're probably doing a lot of drug running as well. I mean, it just doesn't really seem like this is used for that many good purposes for the community. Just seems like something that Trevor is using for himself, so it's not really the most beneficial to the community here, but I do think it's an important thing to have like an actual airfield here just so you can get some supplies and you know, be kind of more connected to the rest of the world. Although it doesn't really seem like this area is that far away from Los Santos itself. Due to the actual interstate system in the game, it seems like everything is so close together and you can kind of just visit everything in such a short time period. So maybe people could live in Sandy Shores and actually like work in Los Santos. And now heading over to Sonora National Park. I'm assuming this is based off of Joshua Tree National Park and also like the Sonora Desert here. And, you know, it's kind of cool. I mean, it's just such a small national park. It just has a bunch of Joshua trees, which are extremely cool. I mean, they are very unique plants and they just, you know, have a very unique look. But it's just so funny seeing this national park and seeing how small it is, because in real life, there's no way this would be a national park. This thing is absolutely tiny. You got one RV parked here. You have absolutely no campsites for people to park at. Like, this is just some normal people living in their houses here. Like, I don't know why there isn't any actual campsites here. I feel like that would be a really cool thing where you have like a bunch of RVs parked outside at a specific spot. But in general, that is just such a small campsite and doesn't really add anything to the actual game besides showing that there are national parks, and even if they are extremely small, there are areas that are kept for nature itself, which is at least kind of cool. I mean, it does seem like people are walking around, they're doing their backpacking, they're exploring this area, but there's really not that much to explore. It also is funny though, because Joshua Tree is pretty close to like the Sandy Shores area based in real life, like the Salton Sea. So these are pretty close areas, but I feel like Joshua Tree is more representative of like the Palm Springs area rather than like the Salton Sea area, just because I feel like a lot of rich people go over to Joshua Tree. You're going out to Palm Springs, you're spending some time there. So it is just kind of funny that in game they don't really have like a Palm Springs equivalent, and they instead went with like the worst possible area that they could put here to kind of represent the poorer areas of California. So it really does a good job of like representing that, but it just is kind of funny that they didn't do any Palm Springs representation, because I feel like that's probably the most known part of this area. And then right by this, we have this place called Beam Me Up, which is an alien, I don't know what you want to call it, art installation you have here, which is based on a real life art installation that is in this sort of area around the Salton Sea, which is called Salvation Mountain, which is all about like Jesus saving them. And here you have the aliens saving these people. And actually in real life, it's right by a place called Slab City. So maybe Stab City is kind of like a similar name to that, but this is a pretty cool area to visit in the actual game, because you have all these kind of like alien references, and obviously there are a lot of other alien references in GTA 5. I know a lot of people think there is some sort of conspiracy with like Mount Chiliad, the aliens, and even like Red Dead Redemption 2. And maybe there is a conspiracy because Rockstar has hidden a lot of Easter eggs in the game that still people are finding to this day. And this area honestly is just really cool. It just really feels different from the rest of this area out here in the actual game. Like, this area is not all that cool, and this is kind of like a nice burst and pop of color, which just feels so different from the rest of this area around Sandy Shores. So I just think it's a pretty cool area to go and visit. I then headed over to the interstate, and this is the U-Tool here, and there also is like a self-storage thing here. It's supposed to be like a Home Depot area where, you know, you can come and get some Home Depot type stuff, but it doesn't seem like anyone is actually in this area getting any tools. It does seem like it's kind of a weird place to have a Home Depot where it's so far away from the city. Like, obviously you can have a Home Depot so far away from the city, but I feel like you're trying to get like Home Depot customers being close enough to like a big area of population so people can work on their houses. And this, it seems like you're in like Sandy Shores, which isn't a very, you know, valuable area. It doesn't have a lot of people that have a lot of money, so it just seems like kind of a weird place to have like a Home Depot type store. And right next to it, you have this very small community that's around like a 24/7, which is like, yeah, the 7-Eleven equivalent here. And I don't know if I'd really want to be living next to the freeway and a 7-Eleven and another store, but you know, to each their own. And now heading over to the recycling center. This really fits this area because you have a recycling center where they're kind of reusing all this scrap and taking all this scrap and recycling it. It just kind of fits the Sandy Shore area because Sandy Shores area is kind of like fully abandoned, and it kind of feels like a lot of these planes here where, you know, they're just kind of let out to rust and there's not that much going on in this area. And it also just kind of fits the industrial vibe of this area around here, where you have the wind farms, you have the oil derricks, you have all these different industrial things going on in this area. Continuing to head to the east, we run into the quartz works here, and the quartz works are, again, another just weird industrial thing in this area. This is more of a quarry where I guess they're taking up the dirt from the ground and taking out the quartz. I don't really know how that works. I know quartz is used in a lot of different things, so it doesn't make sense that you're kind of like quarrying things from the ground to get the quartz out. But it is just, again, so funny to see all these industrial things just all in the same area. I don't know if this is just something that Rockstar want to do, where they want to put a lot of the industrial things in one area, or if it was just a thing where they didn't really have a ton of other space to put all these things and just made sense to kind of put them all around Sandy Shores. But it just does kind of hurt the overall integrity of Sandy Shores when there are this many places that probably would be big job centers right outside Sandy Shores. Like when you have this many places that have a lot of jobs right outside Sandy Shores, which just isn't a place that seems to be doing all that well, it just doesn't really make sense that Sandy Shores would be doing so poorly when you have all these huge job centers that don't really have any other places to get their people from. So it seems like all these people would either, you know, maybe not be working in this area or something else. Maybe it's just all automation by this point, but it still seems like there would be more jobs in this area than it's shown in game. And then I went all the way up to the top of this mountain here, and you can see a ton of different stuff all the way up here. You can see all the way over all the wind farms, all the way into the sea over here, and you can see all the way out into the east and all the way into the water areas over there as well. I guess people are also hiking up this area as well. There's just not that much going on in this area, though. You kind of just are looking out at everyone else. Eventually, though, I did return to the road and started to check out this area here, and this is the road that goes all the way into the Humane Labs Research Center. So this is where you have to go and drive and get all the way out here. Again, it's just another thing that is just a huge job center that just doesn't really have any suburbs to take from except for Sandy Shores. You also have the IAA agents out here, which they have to be out here to protect the humane area, because this is the main one there, like FIB trying to go take out what the IAA is doing in Humane Labs, and that is of course why Steve Haynes is there as well. And then eventually going all the way down to Humane Labs. I saw this deer get hit, which is kind of funny, but again, Humane Labs just seems like another one of these like very big things. Like at least Humane Labs is like used in the actual like missions of GTA 5. Like obviously I don't really know what happens in online, but it's probably also used in online as well. But it's just so funny seeing these huge things, and it's like, wow, this is used for just one mission in the actual story of the game, and it's this huge laboratory that is just out there, and people can chill and see it. And then I headed back from Humane Labs because, again, there's just not that much to see out there. There's a bunch of different grain silos around this area around Harmony, which does make sense because Harmony does have a lot of these different kind of farm areas. So having these huge like grain silos and things to kind of, obviously that makes a ton of sense because you need the infrastructure to hold all of the things that these farms are producing. But again, just another thing that just doesn't really make sense when you see Sandy Shores not having a ton of jobs, because it just does seem like there are so many places that would be huge job centers right outside Sandy Shores, right outside Harmony, and yet these towns are doing extremely poorly. Again, it could just be automation and just having these farms use less people or use like immigrant labor, and they're just not paying them all that well. But there are just so many crazy places that could provide a lot of jobs to these people. So again, it just seems a little weird that all these areas around Mount Chiliad just have absolutely zero jobs. And now heading over to the Cape Catfish area, and just this area around here. I mean, you do have that really cool lighthouse out here. This also just seems more of like kind of a touristy area, and it's so funny looking at like this Cape Catfish area and seeing that there's only like you have this one lighthouse here, but there's only one house over here. Like, I feel like this would be a cool little town to go and visit and, you know, spend a little bit of time at. And again, Rockstar could just be representing it with this one person here is like this entire town, even though probably in real life there would be at least a couple more homes out here. But just so funny that this guy can just post up and have his home right next to the lighthouse here, get an amazing view. I mean, this house would probably sell for like, I don't know, at least a couple $1 million, because this is a really nice view. You get to look out and see this beautiful lighthouse. I mean, the lighthouse is probably one of the cooler things that you can see into this ocean area, but overall, this is just an absolutely beautiful place to live. And I would just really be hyped if I was this guy, because you got one of the best plots of land in the entire game, and no one else even lives near you, so you can be nice and away from everything else. So it's a perfect place to retire. And then going over to the other town over here, I mean, again, it's just another place that seems like a little bit too small of a town for what it'd be. I guess this at least makes a little bit more sense. You got some people getting their houses foreclosed on, and I feel like a lot of these are some of the bigger trees. So this area feels a little bit more temperate and more like northern than the areas around Los Santos, which feel more like palm trees-y. And, you know, this is the place where you go to the humane labs and you get to go in through the submarine. So this area, I don't know, is kind of cool. It just seems like kind of a place that has been left behind by society, as, you know, boats don't become as important when you can just, you know, transport yourself in a lot of other ways, like using a car. So it just becomes a lot less important. Heading back into the Grapeseed area, you can see that there are a lot of these huge farms around here, huge ranch, the O'Neill's Ranch, which is the one that Trevor takes out during the game, and it seems like a lot of these are seemingly employed immigrants here. These are people working for super low wages, and this is just a classic thing in California right now, where you can get all these immigrants who are coming across the border and are willing to work for less than minimum wage because, you know, they don't have any other thing, and you can rat them out to the police if you really want to. So it just is a really bad thing that happens in the Central Valley, because you kind of abuse these people and use their immigrant status to get them to take lower wages from you, and you can kind of work them over the bone just for this thing. It's not really like indentured labor, but it's like very similar to that, where you're kind of using these things to get them to work for less pay than they should be getting if they were a normal person or a normal citizen. And, you know, this area right here, again, it just doesn't really make a ton of sense for all this area to have all these different farms and yet not have a ton of jobs. I mean, even the immigrants here, like, they would probably be cramping up into, like, you know, I don't know, 2-story rooms with like 6 people in them. It just seems like this area should have a little bit more going on and a little bit more like kind of happening. Like, even in these areas, even if you have all these families and they're working to the bone at all times, there should be some sort of like young people around these areas. Obviously, there aren't any kids in the GTA games because they don't want you to run over the kids, but I don't know, I just feel like there'd be more going on in this area, especially around Grapeseed, where it seems like they have a ton of people working on the farm. So it's like, where are all these people living? You know, you have these orange farms, you have the grain farms, you have all these different things that are going on in this area, and yet where are all the people that are working on the farms? Where are they all living? Because there are people working on the farms. There are so many people in these areas that are just NPCs out here. So where are they actually living? It doesn't seem like they're living in Grapeseed, because Grapeseed feels like a place that's kind of deteriorating and going down. Just some of these things don't make a ton of sense in the actual lore of the game, which I do think is interesting, because again, just a lot of the things in GTA 5 don't really make a ton of sense. The map is a lot emptier than you would expect, and you just feel like a lot of it doesn't really feel real. It feels like a place that, you know, people could be living in, but they don't live in it, because there are just so many things that don't make sense when you think about it in terms of like a real economy and how these things would work. Because again, there's so many jobs provided by this area, and yet there's not a lot of places for those people to go live. And like even the O'Neill Ranch, like you'd assume that there's at least, I don't know, 20 to 30 people working on this ranch here. And, you know, you have this one farmhouse here, and this is where the O'Neills live. But like, where are all these workers living? They're not seemingly working in Grapeseed, because, I mean, there are a solid amount of houses in Grapeseed. But for the 30 people here, and then like the, I don't know, 150 people that work on the 5 other ranches, like where are they all living? It just is a confusing thing to me. And eventually visiting some of these other places, it just is kind of interesting seeing how it just kind of like copy and pasted farm over, which again does make sense for Grapeseed because it really does feel like a farming community here. But I'm just kind of like wondering why all this area is just like so farming when kind of some of the other areas around here don't really seem to be all that well for farming. Like Sandy Shores feels like a very deserty area, and just like you go a little bit further past Mount Chiliad and you get this area that is actually really nice for farming. I don't know how it works because a lot of times when there's like a huge mountain, which they're right below Mount Chiliad here, there's like this thing called a rain shadow where the mountain will block stuff, and then you get a lot of like farming land on one side, and then the other side is going to be extremely desolate and not have a ton of rain there. So this, I guess, could be like the rain shadow side, and it was raining when I actually came through here, so maybe this is just the rain shadow side and it gets a ton of rain, and a lot of people are wanting to spend their time here because there is just a lot of farming that can go on in this area. But I just think overall Grapeseed is not all that interesting of an area. I mean, a lot of these areas around the Sandy Shores area, I feel like these really could be fleshed out communities with their own kind of vibe, but I feel like they kind of all merge together. You have Harmony, you have Sandy Shores, and you have Grapeseed, and they all could be pretty unique, but they all kind of feel like these desolate areas that are all being kind of run down. When I think like Sandy Shores definitely makes sense for that vibe. Harmony feels like more of like a stopover town, but I feel like Grapeseed should be doing at least a little bit better than some of these other places because it seems to be in a much better location, and it seems like there are at least some jobs in the area. You can be working at some of these other places, but it just kind of feels to be grouped into like the Sandy Shores Harmony area, that these are three towns that are kind of not thriving because everyone's leaving and everyone's moving away and everything is becoming abandoned, which just only feels like it makes sense for Sandy Shores because that used to be a vacation place until everyone moved away, when the sea actually did become not as cool to stand by when everything was getting sucked up from the sea. But overall, I do think Grapeseed is a pretty cool place to go visit. I just wish they had some more going on with it. Eventually, we get to the community of Galee, and this is a community that is on the foot of the Mount Chiliad here and is also in between the Alamo Sea here. So you kind of have a mix of these two major geographical features and these people that are kind of using them. And these people very seem similar to like the Cape Catfish people, where it seems like they're using a lot of the boats and they don't really have much of a community anymore because people aren't using the boats as much here. So it makes a good amount of sense, but it just doesn't really seem like this is the coolest community to go visit. It seems everything is kind of rusted and run down, and there's not a ton of investment here, which makes sense because this is like a small town away from all the big major job centers. And then going over, there's also a couple houses a little bit further down. These ones seem to be an even further out community. I don't know if this has any specific name to go with it, but there are just two houses here and some people chilling out here. So I don't really know if there's any specific thing going on here. It just kind of seems like a boating pier and some things going on. This could be a little bit cooler of a place to live. Like nothing here seems rusted. It just seems like some people are hanging out, chilling, doing whatever they want here because it just seems to be fun to hang out here. I mean, this area is a lot more beautiful. And then eventually I went all the way up to Mount Chiliad. This did take me a couple of tries because I did try to drive all the way up here, and that is not a smart idea at all, where I was trying to drive on the hiking paths up here. So it didn't really work out, but I eventually just put myself up here and, got almost all the way up to the top and then eventually drove my way up here. And it's kind of funny, like driving up this area because it kind of is a hard drive. And I'm like, these people can really walk all the way up here. It just seems kind of crazy that someone would walk all the way up to the top of Mount Chiliad instead of taking like the tram up here and getting to go all the way up to the top just using the ropeway or whatever it's called. The aerial tram, I guess, is the probably the right word here. But you do get some beautiful views from the top of Mount Chiliad, and Mount Chiliad just seems like kind of an interesting place to go visit in the actual game because having a mountain that is this big and just towers over the rest of the map just seems a little weird in the context of the game. And again, this is one of the major complaints with GTA 5, where a lot of people say that the mountains just take up too much space. I do agree with that because it kind of funnels you into this highway system that goes around the mountains, and these mountains are cool. Like there is the whole like Mount Chiliad mystery, and a lot of people talk about Mount Chiliad, and I think Mount Chiliad itself is actually a pretty interesting place to go visit. Like there is a ton you can see from here. But the fact that it takes up so much space in comparison to some of the other things, it just doesn't really make sense in the overall bit of the game. And when there are so many other mountains, it just doesn't work as well. Like, I can see all the way to Los Santos from here, and I can see basically the entirety of the map from Mount Chiliad, but there's not really that much to do on Mount Chiliad besides, maybe go on some dirt bike races. But it's like, okay, you can have Mount Chiliad as the one mountain that does this, but when you have like 14 other mountains that are just taking up space and not providing anything else, it just gets to be a little bit annoying and not like it provides all that much. And then the cable car, I do think, is a really cool thing to have in the actual game. And this is, I believe, based off of one in Palm Springs that you can take up to a huge mountain around that area, where you can basically go from Palm Springs all the way up to a huge mountain, and it'll basically take you from the bottom all the way up to the top, which is just a really cool thing. And just adds a little bit of like, oh, Rockstar took this from an actual place and put it into the actual game, which is just so cool to see. But you can see so much from Mount Chiliad. It's just absolutely insane to visit a mountain that just has this much prominence over the rest of the map. And then I want to head over to this side to see over to Paleto Bay area, which is kind of cool, but there's just not that much going on the other side. And I feel like the thing is, Mount Chiliad could be super cool if it was in the middle of the map, but the fact that it's so far to the north just does take away a little bit of the uniqueness of Mount Chiliad, just because it doesn't really feel like a place you have to go to and you have to visit for a time being. It's just kind of this place that is all the way up at the top of the map that you can kind of avoid if you don't want to go over to it. And that's the problem with the GTA 5 map, is just there's not that much going on the top end of the map to really have a lot of like return visits there, especially when you can just go on the freeway there and just immediately get there in like 5 to 10 minutes, which is again another one of the big complaints of GTA 5. But then I eventually left and went down on the freeway because I was not trying to spend too much time on Mount Chiliad because there's just not that much going on there. And this freeway, again, one of the biggest complaints about GTA 5 is that the fact that you can basically just go on the freeway and get to your spot no matter what, because it is just one big loop around the island here. And I do think there's no actual like natural formations that really stop you from going on the freeway, which is a big setback. And then I went over to this 24/7, this little stop to get gas here. This is like one right outside Paleto Bay. I needed to get a nicer car because I was just so annoyed with switching cars so often that I wanted to get a little nicer one, and this one is a little bit faster than some of the other ones I've been using this entire time. But you can see that Paleto Bay kind of does have these like, I don't know if I want to call it like a suburb, but like a little bit of the development that goes outside the town itself. I do think Paleto Bay should have been a little bit bigger of a settlement, because the fact that you have such a small settlement on the other side of the map and then it kind of like anchors it with Los Santos just doesn't really make sense, because you're not going to spend a ton of time here. If it's a small settlement, it needs to be a bigger settlement to actually have a lot of time to spend around here. And there's just not that much to do around this area. Like, it needs to be more similar to something like Valentine, where at least if it is a small settlement, it has a bunch of things to do there, so you can spend a lot of time on the opposite side of something like Los Santos, which just has a lot going on because it's a huge city. I then went over to Dignity Village, which is a little tent village outside of Paleto Bay here, and I just passed by that cop, want to see what he was up to. And these guys talk about capitalism being crisis, and that the fact that they want to live in a tent city where they can have a nice social justice, human rights area away from everyone else, which I do think is a pretty cool thing to kind of push out here. The fact is, capitalism isn't really great for everyone, and maybe some people can live in a little tent city commune here, even though it doesn't look like this is a place that I would want to live in, because all these people seem to be living in some sort of squalor. Like, I would not want to live in this tent city, but again, these people can at least live their lives out here and live in their little mud shack and in this tent city where it doesn't seem to be like they're doing all that well. But seemingly they at least seem to be a little bit more happy than they would be living everywhere else. And I do think something like this is just a good thing to have, like some sort of commune for people that can't really succeed in regular society, because it just makes it so that people can have something to fall back on if they can't, get out there in regular society. And I just do think communes are things that can work for people, even if they don't really work for the general society. And I just don't think communism makes sense for the general society, because people often want more than they can actually get. And that's just something that works a lot better in capitalism, although I do think capitalism is still a flawed system in general because you have these people that just amass so much more wealth compared to other people. But eventually we get into Paleto Bay, and Paleto Bay seemingly kind of reminds me a lot of the area around Grapeseed, where you do have a lot of these industrial villages. But again, Paleto Bay seems to be doing a lot better than the areas around Harmony or Grapeseed because it just, I don't know, it just seems to be doing a little bit better. You have like this farm here, and a lot of these farms are owned by Clucking Bell. Like Clucking Bell does have a huge presence in this area around Paleto Bay. I guess Clucking Bell is supposed to be like Taco Bell in real life. And I don't know if Taco Bell has any like similar like farms or things where they're slaughtering chickens, but it is kind of funny that you can see that it's a huge like job provider in this area, and that Clucking Bell is actually like a good one for the community, where it seems like these people are all working together for something. But this is the Donkey Punch family farm, and this is actually a co-op, so that means that kind of everyone shares in the profits, which is a really cool thing. I feel like farms should be more like this, where just everyone's kind of working together for the greater good, and they all kind of want to provide something for everyone else, which I just do think co-ops really do a good job of doing. And kind of in the same area, you have a lot of these orange trees and then a lot of these like greenhouse farms. It just does remind me a lot of California. The thing about Los Angeles is Los Angeles used to be these huge orange farms in like the 1920s, and then everything kind of got filled in by all this development, and that's why you have LA being so sprawled out, because a lot of these were just orange farms, and then they kind of just like all filled in together where people started living there. And you have all of these people who are working on the farms here and kind of just, I don't know, working out, seeing what's up here, but there's not really that much going on, and it seems like these farms are just kind of not doing that much. But eventually we can see the Clucking Bell thing to the left, which is a chicken processing plant, I think. And then you have this Globe Oil. The one thing about this Globe Oil here is I was looking at the gas prices. I saw a YouTube video about the gas prices in GTA, and I was like, some of these gas prices are crazy, where you can go like even, I don't know, 2 to 3 minutes down the road and the gas prices will literally just double in price, which is so funny. But you have all these different like greenhouses. They're all trying to provide some things for the family. I don't know. It's just a lot of immigrant workers working on these areas. And the thing about Paleto Bay is it doesn't feel as much like an immigrant town or something like this, where it feels more Central Valley with all these different farms. But then it's kind of based on like San Luis Obispo in real life, which is like a college town. And at the same time, it feels a little bit more like a place where, you know, people go to retire, or it's a little small community that's doing somewhat well, and just doesn't really seem like this is an area where you'd have a lot of these farms with people doing stuff like that, because this feels like a coastal town where there aren't going to be a ton of farms like that. And even looking at that building over there, which says it was supposed to be completed in 2008 or started in 2008. So this building has been going on for 18 years now, and they have not completed absolutely anything. Then looking around Paleto Bay, I do think the houses here are pretty cool. It just does remind me a lot of these coastal towns like San Luis Obispo. Does make a good amount of sense of what they're trying to kind of, you know, base it off of here. I think the rock out here is called like Morro Rock in real life. It's based off of one in San Luis Obispo, and this area kind of just represents a more California coastal vibe, away from everything, where you're kind of like segregated from everyone else by these mountains, and you don't really have to deal with the regular, you know, things of normal society. And here you have like this, I don't know, little apartment area. It just kind of reminds me of these smaller towns that, you know, they have a lot more of a quiet thing going on, and you don't have to feel like you're a part of this huge megalopolis like you do in Los Santos. I do think it makes sense as like a cool town to go visit, but again, when Paleto Bay is your second biggest town in the game, you have done something wrong, because Paleto Bay is a cool place in game, but just cannot be your second biggest town, because it's not all that interesting of a place to go visit. And especially when you have it on the opposite side of the map as Los Santos, you're not going to spend any time in the Paleto Bay area because it's just not that cool to go visit. This area just doesn't have that much going on. There's not a lot of interactivity. And again, this is the thing that I do believe that GTA 6 will change, because I mean, you can see that Red Dead Redemption 2 was so interactive and there's so much going on that even a place like this Clucking Bell Farm here would probably have something that you can do, or at least something that you can see or interact with. And I think that's one of the things that GTA 6 really needs. It really needs to feel like a real world that people live in. And supposedly there's going to be thousands of interactions in GTA 6. And I do think that's one of the things that can really make a world feel lived in, where you have to have all these interactions with real people that feel spontaneous and feel like they could happen in real life. Because if you go outside enough, you will have some very interesting interactions with people, and just weird stuff is going to happen. If you need to put yourself into these situations that are going to have these unique opportunities, weird stuff's going to happen. And I think one of the best things to do is go out and explore real life, because unique things are going to happen every time you go out there, no matter what. And I think that's just a really important thing to do, is go out and explore, because unique things are going to happen, cool things are going to happen. And the more you put yourself into uncomfortable situations, the cooler things are going to happen to you. And then you're going to have really interesting opportunities if you want to do something cool and if you want to kind of just explore life. And I think that's what I like about exploring these GTA worlds, and you kind of get to compare them to actual real life and how a real world works. And I think the one thing about this, especially when comparing it to something like GTA 4, is GTA 4 feels a lot more lived in, because you can go around, you can see people doing things. I think because GTA 5, you have more of this entire island that does have things going on, but it just feels so much emptier outside of Los Santos, while GTA 4 is just this entire city the entire time, which again, it doesn't really feel as real because there's not like other real people, but because it's one city, it feels a lot more contained on what is real, and that area feels a lot realer than the area of like GTA 5 here, where you just have so many empty areas and these kind of liminal spaces when going around and visiting these areas. But Paleto Bay itself, I do think, is a pretty solid town. I do think it's a little bit better off than something like Grapeseed, where Grapeseed has all these businesses that are kind of shutting down. Paleto Bay seems to be doing somewhat well. Like, obviously it's not doing amazingly. You do have a lot of these buildings for lease, but it seems like most of the buildings here are at least in somewhat good repair, and it's not like people are going around and just destroying all these buildings. There isn't any major abandoned buildings in this area, so I do think Paleto Bay would be, a cool town to live in, and probably is the second best town in the entire game. Again, it just doesn't really make sense when you have like the three major towns of the game in GTA 5 are Paleto Bay, Sandy Shores, and then Los Santos. It just makes everything happen in Los Santos, and it makes Los Santos easily the most interesting place to spend your time in here. So it just kind of makes the map so segregated to one side, where it's like everyone's going to spend all their time in Los Santos and never get to explore any of these other places, because there's nothing to go out here and really explore and hang out in these places, because they don't have that much going on. Like, yeah, you got this Blaine County Depot, but nothing is happening in Blaine County that wants players to explore out into those areas. I do think that's the one thing about GTA 5, although I do think they really did a good job of nailing like the kind of sandboxy stuff that you can do in GTA 5. I just think the overall map here is definitely lacking, and I think GTA 6 hopefully will change that. I think Florida is a lot more interesting of an area to do instead of like the Southern California area. Obviously, I do think San Andreas would be a lot cooler if you had like San Fierro here, or even Las Venturas, because those are things that kind of like add more into this area. And I think you just have one city here, and it hurts a lot, because California really isn't just one city. Like, Los Angeles obviously is the biggest city in California, but I do think a lot of the things that make California interesting is kind of the dichotomy between Northern and Southern California, and that's not really represented in the game here, because you don't really have any Northern California here. You just kind of have this Southern California area that kind of goes up into the Northern California area here, where you kind of have these big like redwood, sequoia-esque trees. I don't really know if they're based on either of them. I'm assuming they're more sequoias because they don't really look like redwoods, but there's not really that much of a dichotomy between Northern and Southern California in the actual game. You kind of just have everything in Southern California, and I think that kind of does a disservice to what California itself is, where there is this big divide between Northern California and Southern California, where you have the Bay Area where all this tech investment is, and all these kind of like weird things that happen in California, where you get a lot of like the California tech bros, they're all in that area there. And then you get Southern California, which is a lot more like culture based, where you have all these musicians and you have all the television and all the movies, and that's all in Southern California. And you kind of have this dichotomy between the finance center in San Francisco and the Bay Area, and then you have like the culture center in Los Angeles and Southern California, and the population centers out there as well. So I just don't really think that San Andreas itself in GTA 5 does a good job of kind of representing California as a whole. And I hope in Miami or like in Leonida in GTA 6 they do a better job of like representing the entire state, which I do think they will do, because they kind of have like the Key West there, they've got Miami, obviously like something like Orlando I feel like is going to be kind of shafted in GTA 6, but I do understand you can't like put Orlando, Tampa, and all these other cities because they don't feel as different as something like Los Angeles and San Francisco do. But eventually we go over to these lodges here. I mean, this area feels very different from the rest of the map. It feels kind of, I don't know, homey and just in the forest here, which I do think is kind of cool. I wish they had more of an area that was in the forest here and kind of, you know, have some sort of city here. But again, there's just not that much going on in this GTA 5 map to have these areas have their own personality. So it works out well enough in its own way. And then here you have the tramway that goes all the way up to Mount Chiliad, which again is based off of something I believe in Palm Springs, where you can go up to the top of the mountain, essentially all the way from Palm Springs, and it goes up like 5,000 feet or something crazy. Overall, I think that's a really cool thing to reference in the actual game. Then you have the lumber over here. This is more representing like the Humboldt area in California. So you kind of just like miss all this area in the middle, like the Bay Area part, because this area is all like Humboldt and like super Northern California, where you have a lot of the logging industry. And like even in Oregon and Washington, you have like these logging industries, because you have these super like old growth forests, or these areas that used to be old growth forests and now are just like recycled forests, where you have these big trees sprouting up and they have to cut them down after a long enough period of time. And then you have these like huge lumber processing plants, which I do think this is a pretty cool area. I do like that at least this location was used for a mission in the GTA 5 actual story. I feel like it just gives this area a little bit more of an actual place that you feel like you can visit in game, which again, a lot of the other places, a lot of the other industrial areas just don't have any actual use in the story. At least also like the Clucking Bell area is used in the Paleto Bay heist, so I think that's also kind of cool. But I just feel like this lumber location feels a little bit cooler, because there's a gunfight that goes down here when you have to save my goat Lamar, the best character in the entire game. You need to save him from here, and you know, this area just kind of feels cool. I was like a gunfight area as well. I just wish there were more locations that are kind of these like industrial locations that have cool things going on. And then I went all the way over to the altruist cult out here, and Trevor has, you know, a specific connection with these guys because they're cannibals. And this is also another cool area that I think could have been used in a little bit better of a way, but I do think they at least have some sort of encounters that you can do with them, and I do think that makes this area a little bit more interesting as a location, because if there wasn't anything to do here, like what is the point of this location? But at least you can have some stranger missions with these guys and some interactions with them, which does make this area a lot more interesting than a lot of the other locations that you can visit in the game. It just does feel like a real location that real people live in, although they are a little bit culty and they do have some weird things going on. And even looking down from this location, this has got to be one of the coolest places for a cult. I just wish there was a couple more missions for these people, because this could be a really cool location to have, you know, a lot of missions tied to. I do think, again, like the Epsilon cult as well, if there was more going on with them that you could like really get into. Again, they do have stranger missions, which I feel like is enough for the Epsilon cult. There's not enough for the altruistic guys here, but it still is pretty cool that you can go and visit them and there are like encounters with them. And then this happened where the police car bumps into me twice, and then they start getting me some stars. So I have to go down this area right here, which I want to explore and kind of just check out, because this is like the I don't know, cut through that you can go into like the Grapeseed and Harmony area. You also do have that amazing bridge right there, which is like one of the more beautiful bridges in the entire game, just an architectural marvel, I think. And this area also just has some amazing, beautiful views that you can kind of go through this canyon here and drive through this area. I mean, there are just some areas in GTA 5 I'm like, I cannot believe this game was made in 2013 and has like a lot of these extremely beautiful areas. Obviously, this isn't really a 2013 game because they have added so many changes, and like especially on the PC version, they have like the enhanced edition. Like I'm playing on the legacy version and it still looks beautiful, but obviously it isn't like a 2013 game because they added so many extra things to it. While visiting this area, I was like, bro, these police cars just somehow found me when I was trying to hide away from them. It just makes me so mad that these guys got me into a police chase while I was trying to do this exploration thing. Like, this is one of the more beautiful areas in the game. I can't really stop and slow down and enjoy the beauty because these police cars are chasing me and trying to get me to crash and die, which I eventually did do, but I eventually switched into another car and we kind of explored the rest of this area. But this area, I don't know, it's just a really cool place to go visit. I feel like there are just certain areas in GTA 5's map that I'm just like, they're just beautiful areas to go and explore yourself. And I do think this is one of the few things where it's like, again, if you're playing any video game map, there's some times where you just have to go and explore the map and just take in beautiful things, because video game designers, they have to put every single thing in this world. Someone had to place that by their hand, and I think when you go out and explore and kind of interact with these things, it just makes it feel like a real world that people lived in. And because every single thing here was handcrafted by someone, every single tree that was placed, every single detail that was placed was either handcrafted or like procedurally generated and then handcrafted on top of that, where they added some things on top of that. So it just is really cool to go visit these worlds and just see what people actually put here. But eventually we get all the way back to the Alamo Sea, and it is kind of cool that you can kind of go through this area and go through this little ravine area and follow the river all the way to the Alamo Sea. But then you have to go and visit the Alamo Sea, which is one of the most ugly places in the entire game. So I wanted to leave and go back to the highway instead. I eventually returned to the highway, and we can see that there is this place called Hookie's, which is a little diner on the side of the road. And I do think that is just a nice place to go visit. Like, if you are ever, going on a road trip, you got to stop at these diners because they have a lot of lore to them themselves, and just go around and explore the world around you, because there are places that have lore just like any of these video games here. And again, putting yourself into uncomfortable situations will often result in the best rewards. But eventually I went into Fort Zancudo. I did have to put some cheats on to get into this area without people attacking me. And Fort Zancudo, I feel like, again, is a pretty cool place to go visit while in game, because it just doesn't really feel like a place that you normally should be at. Again, Fort Zancudo isn't really that interesting of a place in the actual game. Like, it is just a huge military fort where they got the fighter jets and the planes and the tanks, and it's more used as like a place for the actual like military to be stationed in game and where they can attack you from. So I feel like it's more used in that sense, where I don't really know if there are any major military bases around Los Santos itself. There is like one in real life around like the San Diego area called Camp Pendleton, but I don't really think they have like tanks there. I think it's more of like an Air Force base, and that's like around San Diego as well. So I don't really know if there's any like real life equivalent to Fort Zancudo, but it is kind of funny while exploring it, because even if you have like the hacks on that get you to have the law ignore you, the tanks will still shoot at you somehow, and you'll still get like the 4 stars wanted, because I don't know, sometimes it just doesn't really work. I guess it's like giving you the 4-star wanted and then taking it away immediately, so the tanks will still shoot at you. But I don't know, Fort Zancudo is a pretty cool place to go visit. I feel like whenever you play a game like this, you always want to go into these areas that are unexplored and you can't go into during the normal game. And I think Fort Zancudo is one of them, although there isn't that much going on at Fort Zancudo. It is just a military base, and I feel like very similar to Bolingbroke Penitentiary, there just doesn't really seem to be that much going on that like the player can interact with. Like, obviously the player isn't supposed to be interacting with these people, but there are just a bunch of like NPCs that are doing drills, and it does feel like a somewhat living place. Again, it's not fully living because you can't actually go in here and interact with any of these people, but there are like, trucks going around and things that are happening at the thing, even if no one is ever going to look into these locations and like see what's going on with these people. Like the Fort Zancudo fire station, they got a guy patrolling around it with his gun, and he's just, checking out to see if anyone comes around here and tries to get into the Fort Zancudo fire station. It just feels like a very real, lived-in place in a way that like a video game tries to make a lived-in place. And this is a place that you can't even really go in the actual game. Like obviously there are some missions that you have to go, take some of these things from here, but it obviously isn't a place where you're meant to go and explore like I am here, where I'm going and like checking out all the air bases here and seeing like the random people walk around and, doing drills and marching around. And just so interesting that Rockstar has to put in that extra detail to make these games feel even more lived in and even more interesting, while they really aren't all that interesting in real life when you go and explore these locations. So overall, I do think Fort Zancudo is a pretty interesting place. I mean, you also have it right next to mountains here, but I just kind of wonder, like, where are all these people that live in Fort Zancudo living? Actually, there isn't any actual like housing on Fort Zancudo. It does seem like they have like hundreds at least people working here. Like I've seen hundreds of NPCs going around this area, and where are all these people living? Are they living at Fort Zancudo? Are they living in the area around it? Like, where are all these people living? Another thing that just doesn't really make sense in game. Obviously, we can't look at every single detail and be like, oh, this doesn't have a corresponding real life location. Like, where are these people living? But I feel like this one, there should be some like sort of military housing on Fort Zancudo itself. Maybe I just missed it, but I don't think there's any place that like really looks like military housing here, which I do think would be an important thing for something like Fort Zancudo, because in real life, I'm pretty sure all of these like major forts like this would have some sort of like military housing where everyone lives. I guess like some of these areas could be military housing, but I just don't really think they did a good job of like making military housing where all these people are living. I mean, maybe over there, I don't know. I was just looking at some of these locations and like they could be military housing, but I just think it's kind of hard to tell where the actual military housing is and where it's just like a normal location at Fort Zancudo itself. But finally, we are leaving Fort Zancudo and going to explore the areas around Los Santos. So leaving Fort Zancudo, you have to go over this big bridge. And I do think this is an area that, like, if there's a terrorist attack, they could easily just stop that bridge and like blow it up and, stop people from going in there. Like if there's a bunch of tanks, you can easily take it out by taking out the bridge. But eventually leaving this area around Fort Zancudo, you get into the vineyard area, which is pretty cool. There are all these vineyards in this area. And I think this was the area that was used in the first trailer of GTA, or one of the trailers of GTA, where they have like the crop duster plane going over the vineyards, which I just do think is, I don't know, kind of like a cool little area around here. There are a lot of vineyards in California, and I do think it does a good job of kind of like representing these areas, although they do feel a little bit closer to Los Angeles than they would be in real life. Like in Los Santos, they probably would not be this close to Los Santos, and you wouldn't have people like Devin Weston who could live in this area and also operate in Los Santos, but it's close enough that it kind of makes sense in the actual game. And then you have this weird little building here, which is like a Redwood cigarette building. Like, I don't know what's going on here, and why is there this little, I don't know, building that has a Redwood cigarette right next to it. I just thought that was one of the weirder things that I came across while exploring the entire map. Like, what is that building used for? Who is using that building? And why is there that building there? And then coming over through this area, there are some absolutely amazing views. I mean, this is one of the cooler places to explore if you're just going for the views. Finally going past Devin Weston's house. This guy has got to have spent tens of millions of dollars, if not even more, on that house right there, because that is a beautiful house. And there's no one else in this area. He's also right by the Chumash area, which is like the Malibu representation in the entire game. But we're almost there to Chumash, and now we're going to be exploring the rest of Los Santos and exploring what Los Santos has to offer. I started off in Chumash, which is just outside the city of Los Santos, and this is based on Malibu, which in real life is just outside of Los Angeles itself. And I feel like this is one of the few places in the entire game that just doesn't really feel that similar to the actual Malibu. Like Malibu, yes, of course, it is on the beach here, but I feel like Malibu is like a little bit different than kind of how they present it in the game. Here it just kind of feels like a bunch of houses on the beach, and then you have like the pier and the 7-Eleven here, but there's just really not that much going on that like connects it back to real life. Like, yes, the houses do kind of look like this, but it is just a little bit different in real life when you actually go there, and they have like a whole community around it, and they have like these bigger houses on the hills rather than just like fully on the beach here. So it is a little bit different than it is in real life, but I do think they did a good job of kind of representing it here. You do just have this one like 7-Eleven supermarket, and then you have the pier here, and it all kind of works well together. I just feel like Chumash in GTA isn't really all that interesting of a place to go visit. Like, yeah, you can go visit, and there are a couple of things to do here. Like, there is the Tai Chang thing, which is, I guess, is a little bit further down this area, but there's not really that much to actually do in this area. It kind of is just like this boring old area that there's not really any like random encounters. There's not really much to like do around this area. It's just kind of these nice houses that are here for set dressing to make this area just feel a little bit more realistic and a little bit more interesting while you go around and explore. And like, even the people who did live in this area, like, all you have here is like a cleaner shop. You have, I guess a hair salon here. You have like a restaurant as well. And then you have like 2 7-Eleven supermarkets, which they have here as a 24/7 things. It's like, there's not much to do here. And like, that is very realistic to Malibu in real life, where you do have just a bunch of houses and not that much to do in Malibu itself besides like go to the beach and live in this really nice area. So it does feel realistic in that way, but I just feel like the houses don't really represent Malibu in real life. Now we head down from the Chumash area into Del Perro, and you go on this strip of highway here, which is actually based off the real life PCH, and I feel like this is where Rockstar really killed it with the actual like in-game design, where this really does feel like the PCH. The PCH is just a beautiful area that is kind of like a long strip of highway, and you finally get into this area, which is basically exactly what it looks like in real life in Santa Monica here. One of the most interesting things about Rockstar and how they actually like turn a city into an actual game is they kind of just take like little snippets of the actual world and they put it in here to make it really feel familiar. Like, this bridge here is like exactly the same thing in real life. Even this like kind of parking area is pretty similar to what they have in real life. And then you have like these houses here, which are all also there in real life. And they kind of take these like little snippets of things that are in real life. Like, these houses here are pretty iconic houses in Santa Monica, and they kind of just take all these different snippets and they put them together to make a world that like really feels like real life, but also doesn't really feel like real life. You also have this like beach walk here, which again is exactly like it is in real life, and this is where you meet and kind of start the entire game, where you have Michael and Franklin and Lamar all in this area, where they first have that mission where Franklin is repossessing the cars and like bringing them back to the dealership. And just so interesting that kind of Rockstar takes all these different snippets of things that feel real and realistic, and they kind of mash them together to create this real open world kind of thing that feels like real life but yet isn't real life. I then left the beach and wanted to go into Del Perro itself, and this like little stretch of land here, which is a very iconic thing in GTA, is actually basically exactly what it looks like in real life. I feel like the Santa Monica area is probably the one place you visit in LA and you're like, wow, this really looks like GTA, because they did just take so many things from GTA, and like the Del Perro area does really look like Santa Monica in real life. Like, even this area right here and kind of like all these big buildings, like this basically is just downtown Santa Monica, where you have like all these people who are walking on this little grassy park area to the right here, and then all the big buildings to the left. Like, it is really kind of one-to-one in these specific areas, although they did cut out a lot of buildings because like, of course, you're not going to recreate every single building in the entire game just to make it feel realistic. They do have a lot of these buildings in real life, and they did do a good job of like representing that in game. I feel like the park here has actually done a really great job, because this is really what it feels like in real life to go there. You have that specific park on the right side, and you have like a lot of homeless people are in this area right here, but it's just a lot of like tourists that are coming to this area and kind of hanging out. But I did want to go back in my car, because you can actually drive the car on the pier here. I think the pier is probably one of the most interesting things that Rockstar recreated in the actual game, because it does feel like very one-to-one. There are a couple different locations that are basically one-to-one real life in the game, and I think one of them has to be the Santa Monica / Del Perro pier here, where Rockstar essentially just fully copy and pasted the Santa Monica pier and turned it into the Del Perro pier. Like, you do have this exact same parking lot to the right when you go to Santa Monica. You have that exact same building to the left. You have this building that's right to the left there as well. It's just everything is almost exactly the same there. And even though you can't really drive into the pier, like there is times when you can go and drive on the pier and park in the pier. And even though you can't drive here normally, this could be a thing that they probably like changed during this time period. It does just look essentially one-to-one. There are a couple of these locations that are essentially one-to-one with real life. You also have this, which is like Pacific Park in real life and is just like a very similar park here as well in the actual game. And then these are basically the exact same restaurants, but there are a couple of places that are essentially one-to-one from real life, and it's all the major like LA landmarks like the Getty Center, the Griffith Observatory. But it's kind of interesting how they just take these landmarks and yeah, they kind of just copy them one-to-one for the actual game, and then they have a lot of other places that you basically just compress a lot of these things into certain areas, because you can't have an LA without, you know, the Santa Monica Pier, without like the Hollywood sign, without any of these things. So they kind of make this fictional world that feels very realistic because they have certain areas that are essentially one-to-one with real life and feel realistic, and they kind of compress a lot of like the neighborhoods and a lot of the actual things that you're like playing through the game, and they kind of compress them into other areas. It just is a really interesting way to design a game, and it's just a very weird thing to think about, because you go to actually LA and you see these things and you're like, wow, that's exactly from GTA. And then you see other things and you're like, they don't have any of this represented in GTA. And just such an interesting way to have this kind of game design ability in the actual game. I then left the pier and headed south into this area that's kind of in between Del Perro and Vespucci, and you have this freeway entrance here, which is exactly what it's like in real life. And then you have kind of all these buildings here, and the area just south of the pier I feel like is a little bit more of like a hospitality place. You have a lot of these like famous hotels that are right there, like Shutters on the Beach is one of them. I think that one is represented in the game here, where you have this like little overlook here, and then you have a lot of these people that are kind of in these, I don't know, weird areas here. Like there's not that much going on. It's kind of just apartments in this area. But yeah, right here is like Shutters on the Beach, I'm pretty sure is what this hotel is called, and it's basically copied one-to-one in the game. But then you immediately get into the Vespucci area, and this is a really interesting area. Like going down the beach from Santa Monica over to Venice is really interesting, and in the game it's kind of like shortened down a lot, but you do still get a lot of the vibe of like going from the beach in Santa Monica all the way over to Venice. I feel like the area around here is kind of shafted because Venice is a very interesting area in real life, and I feel like they kind of just condensed it down to a couple of these areas that are just, you know, very like shoppy. Like Abbot Kinney is a pretty cool area in Venice that they don't have in the actual game, where it's like this really cool street of just like shopping that you can go down. But it's very understandable why they did remove it from the game, because it just doesn't really fit in like a 2013 game. Like maybe in 2026 you have like a really cool shopping area where you can have like 30 different places that you can go inside and like buy things from, but I feel like it just doesn't really make sense in like 2013 Rockstar games. Visiting Los Santos as someone who's actually lived in Los Angeles is also really interesting, because you get to kind of visit these places and you get to see that Rockstar basically designed this game to be a tourist version of Los Angeles. Like a lot of the places that are very important to like LA natives, like Venice itself, aren't really represented in the game. It's kind of just the touristy places like Venice Beach. Like Venice Beach is the most touristy part of Venice itself, and is where like I guess most of the tourists go. Like you go to Muscle Beach, you go to Venice Beach, because it is a pretty cool area. But like Venice itself, I feel like is kind of like a new school thing, very similar to like Silver Lake. If you guys have ever heard of Silver Lake, it's like a very like LA native-y thing, where it's like, oh, that's where all the kind of like weird people live, and like the alt people, the people that think they're cool, and all the transplants live. And those really aren't represented in game. It's more the kind of like touristy spots. And visiting Vespucci Beach itself is pretty interesting, because this area is kind of just like condensed a lot, because they essentially have all of like Venice Beach, or they do a good enough job of like representing Venice Beach. But then you go like and you look a little bit to the south, and it's like you immediately get to the airport, and the airport is pretty far away from Venice Beach. So they kind of have to condense a lot of things down, just because it's not really that interesting to go through all of like LA's like sprawl and suburbs and all that. But I do think Venice Beach here is done a pretty good job. Like they do have a lot of these basketball courts, and you do have all these shops which are just selling a lot of crazy things. It's always funny to go to these shops in LA, and it's like they always have just the weirdest shops in the touristy areas. Like there are never any actual good shops in the tourist areas. It's always just these people who are either selling you like the stupidest memorabilia, or they're selling some like crazy stuff. Like there are a lot of dispensaries down here, which is just so funny to see like where they actually have these certain certain things that are kind of like aimed at tourists versus aimed at actual people. And then to the left here, we have Muscle Sands, which is also Muscle Beach in real life. It's basically just a gym on the beach. Honestly, one of the more underwhelming things when you do go to Venice Beach, because you think that Muscle Beach is like this crazy thing, but it's really just like a couple of guys that work out on the beach. It's really not that cool of a thing unless they have like an event going on there. And then you have some of these markets over here. It's pretty interesting how they represented Venice, because they do have like this one block of things that are really representative in real life. You kind of have these houses, and in between the houses you have like alleyways and all these little ways to get between them, and then you have some of this area for people to actually park. But there's really not that much parking in the Venice area. It kind of is just these weird houses with the alleyways in between them, and you kind of like walk through them, and there is kind of like a labyrinthian maze of like houses and alleyways that you can do when actually visiting Venice. But then you have this like main area going into Venice Beach, and this area is essentially recreated one-to-one. You have like these flags here in real life, and you have like these kind of markets and all these stores on each side of you. And then you also have this sculpture over here. So looking at this sculpture is actually the one that they used to have in real life in the actual game. So like in 2013, you used to have like the actual real life sculpture, and then they had to replace it because the guy said it was like copyrightable and they couldn't actually do it, because like a piece of art versus like a building isn't really a piece of art. And then this area I feel like is a pretty good job of like what it actually looks like in Vespucci Beach, although it isn't as close to like the Santa Monica Pier or the Del Perro Pier in game in real life, but it is a pretty good representation of like what actually goes down here. I mean, maybe you could add a couple more homeless people, just because a lot of homeless people live in this area, live on the beach, because it probably is the best place to live as a homeless person. But they do a pretty good job of representing this area, and I do think it feels pretty realistic when going around Venice Beach and just checking out this area, because almost everything here is basically represented one-to-one in game. Like you have this bike path. Overall, Vespucci Beach is pretty similar to Venice Beach, and I do think Rockstar did a good job of kind of capturing exactly what's there at Venice Beach. I think Venice Beach is a pretty important location in real life to like showing Los Angeles. I think they did a good job of kind of capturing all that is really important in that area. I mean, they got Muscle Beach, they got like the structures, and they got basically everything right in this area. So they did a good job of representing it just like real life. Driving through Vespucci, the neighborhood, is kind of interesting. I mean, it is just kind of these like LA apartment block houses, which is a very common thing in LA. Like essentially all of LA is just these like apartment buildings that are just spammed over and over and over and over again. And they did a good job of kind of representing that. But I feel like Marina del Rey is just smashed into Venice so much in the actual game. Like Vespucci really just is Marina del Rey and Venice smashed together, which just does feel a little bit weird when you're like going around, because you're like right in the marina, and then you also can go like right to the Vespucci canals, which are not really that close in real life, but like here they're like one block away from each other, which I do feel like it makes it a little bit like too packed and too tightly done. But again, it is a video game. You want everything to feel really interesting and like always to turn around a corner and get another new thing. So they do a good job of that. I mean, I really do like the alleyways and everything else they're kind of doing in Los Santos to really make it feel like Venice. I mean, they do a great job of that, but then it's like, bang, you're right in Marina del Rey right now. Like all this on the right side is all where Marina del Rey is. And it's like, if you look on the left side, it's all like the Venice area. So it's kind of just weird like how close together they are, because this is like downtown Venice, and then behind is like normal area of Marina del Rey, and they're right next to each other in the actual game, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, but I do understand it makes sense in terms of like, oh, it's a fun thing to play. You get to see these cool buildings right next to each other, and you don't need to go super far away to actually get them. Like, I do understand it's a video game and they have to do that, but exploring around this area isn't really all that interesting. I mean, Venice and Vespucci don't really have that much going on in the actual game. It kind of is a boring area. Like, there's really not that much going on in this area. It's so interesting, like exploring around the GTA 5 map and comparing it to something like Red Dead Redemption 2. And you can just see that GTA 6 will probably be one of the craziest games ever in terms of all the interactivity, because Red Dead Redemption 2 has a ton of interactivity, and like something like this in Red Dead Redemption 2 would have something that is interesting. Maybe there's like a random encounter of some of the people you meet in this area. Maybe there's just like something else going on, like a stranger mission in this area. And GTA 5 just really doesn't have all that, and it really does make Los Santos feel a little bit like lonely and not as interesting to go around. And now we finally go into the actual canals themselves. They do a pretty good job of like representing the canals in game, but again, it would be really cool to have like someone that, like, I don't know, lives here and there's like things to talk about with these people, but there really just isn't that much going on in the canals to make it like an interesting thing to explore around, besides the fact that there actually are canals, and they did a pretty good job of representing that. I feel like the Venice canals are some of the most underwhelming things to ever see in Venice in real life. And I just feel like it's just such an underwhelming thing compared to like the actual Venice. So I just don't really think Venice is like all that cool of an area in real life, and in the game they do a pretty good job of representing it, but I feel like it's just so overrated, and just all the cool things are just not really that interesting in game. I then headed back into Del Perro, which is actually a pretty interesting place in game. I mean, I didn't really check around the actual town here, but you do have this like 3rd Street Promenade, which is a thing in real life. It is kind of weird to have this like slope here, because the 3rd Street Promenade in real life is just fully like flat, like there's nothing to do here, and they do a great job of actually capturing a lot of these buildings. Like right here, this is an exact replica of an AMC on the 3rd Street Promenade. Like, it's so crazy to see buildings that you've seen in real life in the actual game, even if they're not used in the same context. Like, again, this is a movie theater as well in here, but it's like you explore around the promenade here, and the promenade in real life is honestly in a pretty bad spot right now. And you explore around the promenade here, and it also doesn't look like it's in a good spot, even though this is 2013. But like in real life, the promenade is really not doing well. I just feel like Santa Monica in general is not really doing that well for LA. So this area just doesn't really feel all that interesting in game, but it would be funny to like, yeah, again, if this game was like made in 2026, you'd probably have some cool encounters with maybe like a homeless person or like a tweaker out. It'd just be so interesting to have like a really realistic world where you have encounters with these people in a GTA game. And that's what I think GTA 6 could really do, because again, Los Santos is a pretty cool place. There's a lot of cool things in Los Santos, but they're really just there for set dressing, and they're not really interesting on their own. And then going into this area, you also have the studio right here. So this is Richard's Majestic Studio, and this is, I believe, based off the Warner Bros. One, which is all the way in Burbank, so it's not even close to this actual area in real life, but they did put it here because I do think it makes sense. Like, they didn't do any of the San Fernando Valley in the actual game. Like, none of the San Fernando Valley is depicted in GTA 5, which I think is kind of a good thing. I mean, San Fernando Valley is definitely cool, but I wouldn't really say that there are all that many things that are like that iconic in the San Fernando Valley that you'd have to put in a game representing LA. And then finally getting on the freeway. I mean, this is one of the most important things about LA. There are so many freeways just crisscrossing through all of it, and these ones, I mean, relatively feel like LA freeways. I do think they have a little bit less traffic than I'd be expecting in a normal LA freeway, but you do also have this area where you go under the road here. I think it's a lot longer in the actual game than it is in real life, but I do think it's kind of a cool thing to have, being like going under the freeway here, and they kind of like merge together two different things to make it a little bit longer. Now we head into Little Seoul in GTA 5, which is Koreatown in real life. This is kind of a weird spot because it's right next to Marina del Rey and Del Perro in the game, even though Koreatown is super far away from them in real life. They do a great job of kind of representing it. Like, this is the main street in Koreatown. You have these huge buildings that are kind of going above, but they kind of like mishmash a bunch of different places into this Little Seoul here, where it kind of feels a little bit like Miracle Mile as well. I don't know if they necessarily wanted to do Miracle Mile as well in this area, but you kind of just condensed all the middle part of LA into this one area right here, which is Little Seoul in game. And again, they do a pretty good job of this. Like, Little Seoul really does feel built up, and in real life, Koreatown is like a really built up area, very similar to downtown. And if I had one criticism for Rockstar, I think this area right here in Little Seoul is just not really the greatest. It kind of tries to mismatch too many things into one area, and the fact that it's right by like the beachy parts of LA, like Marina del Rey or Vespucci in game, Del Perro in game, and it's right by that, it just feels kind of weird having like the beachy vibe and like the more like industrial downtown vibes right next to each other. It just seems a little bit weird in that aspect, that it doesn't really capture the LA spirit as well as it could if there was like something in the middle there to kind of like spread these two things out. But I do understand it's a video game. They can't capture LA perfectly in a video game. And then right north of Del Perro, you can actually find Morningwood, which is based off of the LA neighborhood of Westwood, where UCLA is, and that's basically the main thing in this area. You have a lot of these strip malls on the left around this area, where it's just a strip mall, and then you have kind of like all the stores in a little L shape here, and then you kind of have a lot of these apartment buildings. I really do think this area is not really the best made. Like, I feel like it doesn't really represent Westwood all that well. They kind of tried to mismatch a lot of things in this area as well. Like, you have the church here, which I don't really know if this is like a real church, and then you also have like the Pacific Bluffs area, which is supposed to be like Pacific Palisades, but it just kind of like mashes this area into like one small area, which kind of does work. I feel like these areas at least feel a little bit more similar, but I feel like a lot of Westwood kind of gets taken out because they just have like a similar I don't know, kind of like downtown area that we will be exploring that later. But first, I wanted to go to ULSA, which is the UCLA kind of thing in Morningwood here, which is actually really interesting because I've actually been to UCLA. This was where I went to college, and this is actually a really interesting place to visit in game because of the way they kind of portrayed it in the actual game. Because UCLA's campus is pretty large. It's definitely larger than is in the actual game here, and the things they chose to represent is just kind of interesting to me. Like right here on the left is a track and field stadium called Drake Stadium. So that's basically what they're representing with the track and field stadium, which I do think is a pretty important thing. It's like one of the big stadiums on campus because there is no football stadium on campus. And then right here, I think, is one of the halls. I don't know if this is like Rolf Hall or one of the other main halls, but it's the main hall that's right next to the track stadium, and these are not close in real life. And then you also have the basketball stadium here to the left, which is called Pauley Pavilion in real life. This is a pretty good shot of Pauley Pavilion, but just so interesting how they actually decided to kind of like describe each of these places in game, because each of the kind of like shots, they look really good because they basically took a piece, and it's like right here when you're just looking at the stadium, it looks really good. When you're just looking at Pauley Pavilion, it looks really good. But when you have all these things right next to each other, it just is kind of this like weird mismatch of all these locations. Like these are what the halls look like. This is like the hall area. This is like the main area of UCLA. There's this water fountain here. There are all these things in actually real life. Like even this training center, this is a perfect shot here of what the training center actually looks like. But it's just funny because all these places are just like shoved together, and they're like, let's take all the most iconic things at UCLA and put them right next to each other. And just so interesting to see because I've, spent a lot of time around this campus, and just all the interesting things are right next to each other in real life, and they're all just like pushed and forced together. And then looking at the main hall right here, this is Royce Hall, so that's like the main building of UCLA, and I think this is supposed to be Powell Library, but it's definitely not Powell Library, at least from the front on. And then you have like this little traffic circle, and that's where people can actually like drive in their cars and kind of get to. But just so weird, you have all these kind of like different shots that are put together to make this kind of like bastardized version of a real thing that is trying to just show you the hits of all these different locations. Just a really interesting way of like how to depict an area without being able to depict every single thing. The next place I wanted to go to was the Koch Center in game, which is the Getty Center in real life, and this is very close to UCLA in the actual real life and in the game. Like it's a pretty good spot in terms of like, showing it off and kind of like having it be close but also having it be kind of far away. This is also basically a 1-to-1 shot right here. Like this exact like road up to the Getty Center is the exact same in real life. I think this is one of the weirder places to me. Like, why is the Getty Center one of the few spots in game that is like fully 1-to-1 recreated in game? Like the other spots are like the Griffith Observatory is in game as the observatory, and like the Santa Monica Pier, and even like the Hollywood sign and like the Capitol Records building. But those things feel a lot more like LA to me. Like, yes, the Getty Center is pretty popular, but it's just kind of weird that they spent so much time and space on the Getty Center or on the Koch Center here that just really isn't like, to me, like an LA iconic landmark, even though it is a pretty cool place to go visit. I mean, maybe they just wanted to use it for a couple missions, and it is a really like striking area, and it would be cool to like actually have it in the actual game. Like it is cool to have as an actual location you can visit, but I'm like, to spend this much space on the Getty Center, which I honestly personally don't think is all that interesting of a location in real life, is just a little weird to me. But to each their own. I mean, I know they're using it in online right now, so that could be a part of it as well. They had like bigger plans for it, but it is a really cool place to just see out over the entire city here. I mean, the city does look pretty cool when you're actually like looking through it through this lens, and the Getty Center itself, or the Koch Center in game, is pretty cool. I mean, I don't know, I just feel like it's such an overrated place, and the fact that they spent so much space on actually making it this big, it's just a little weird to me. Like, I just don't really feel like it's an LA iconic landmark, but I mean, maybe Rockstar just thought it was a really cool thing to have, and it is kind of a cool thing because you do get these amazing views over the rest of the game. Like, these are some of the coolest views in the entire game, and this kind of does look like LA. I do think it's a little bit skewed towards certain things, and it like feels like a lot more mashed up than it actually is. Like, LA looks a lot more built up than it is in real life, where it's like way more spread out, and you have these certain areas that are kind of popping up, but they do kind of a good job of representing LA even through this like sky view here, where you can kind of see everything from the Koch Center here. And then behind this area, in like the Koch Center area, you can find all these nice houses. This is supposed to maybe represent like Bel Air, but also just the Hollywood Hills houses, which are right above like the UCLA area in real life. So it's kind of cool to go visit these, but there's really not that much going on. I think the Hollywood Hills area itself that you can take like a right here and actually go into is a lot more interesting than this like kind of like weird Bel Air-y area, because the Bel Air area isn't really fully developed, and like the Hollywood Hills at least feels like you're on the hills, you have like a rich house and you're trying to like look over everyone because you're just a rich person and you look down on everyone else. But overall, this area is kind of cool. I mean, you just do get these good views of the rest of the city, and I really like this area where you just get to see these amazing views over the rest of the city. Like Los Santos really does a great job of kind of just feeling like a cool city to drive around and just sightsee and just explore things in the actual game, because there are a lot of really interesting things that you can find in the game. But I just think it would have been nicer to have like the world feel a little bit more built out and more like interactive, because kind of going around it, you don't really have that many interactions with people. Like I was exploring this map for, I don't know, 3-4 hours, and there just isn't that many interactions, even compared to a game like Red Dead Redemption 1, where there are a lot more interaction that you can go down. But these streets are pretty similar to the ones in the actual Hollywood Hills. The ones in the Hollywood Hills, I feel like, are maybe a little bit more windy. I mean, some of the ones here aren't as windy. I think it's the more east you go and the more you get into the actual like hills behind Hollywood, they are a little bit more windy, versus these ones are a little bit more straight. And then here is kind of like the Beverly Hills area. This is called Richmond in game, and this is where our actual Michael lives, so that's pretty cool as well. And this is like kind of like Rockford Hills as well. It's kind of like all this one area that they're all kind of like pushing together into one singular neighborhood in the actual game, which again, like I don't fully love, but I do think it does a good job of kind of representing these areas where a lot of the more rich people and a lot of more wealthy people live, and they kind of have their own little community away from everyone else in Los Angeles. And now we head into the actual like downtown of Morningwood here, and there's not really that much going on. There are these two main theaters here, which are like some of the most interesting things in Westwood itself, where you have these two main theaters, the Fox Theater, and I think the other one's called the Bruin Theater, and one of these is now owned by like Christopher Nolan and a bunch of different movie directors as they took it over after it went out of business. But both of those theaters had gone out of business at one point, and now they're like, one of them's coming back and I don't think the other one's coming back. But either way, this area in Westwood looks pretty similar to real life. I mean, it's kind of just like a mismatch of things here, and it works out relatively well enough. I don't really think that area is that interesting in real life, so it makes sense that it's not like the most interesting place in the game either. And then right here you have this golf course here. I think the golf course is a little bit further to the east. I don't really know what golf course that's based on. And then also you have here a hotel, which I know is one from real life. I just don't know which hotel this is in real life, but it does look pretty cool in the actual game. This area, I don't know, is kind of boring in the game. I mean, you kind of just have these like big roads here. I think this is based off of like one of the intersections in Beverly Hills here. Then you have the Life Invader building as well, which I don't think there's any actual like real life equivalent towards it, because Life Invader isn't really like, there's no Facebook thing in LA. I don't really think there's any similar social media companies in LA. So I don't really know if the Life Invader thing is really based off of anything. This area, I mean, is kind of interesting. There's really not that much going on in here. So let's go to one of the more interesting places. Let's go to the Richmond area. So now we're heading into like the Richmond / Rockford Hills area. This is like based on Beverly Hills and Rodeo Drive. So these are where the really, really nice, you know, stores where they're selling stuff, and kind of like a lot of the office buildings. There are a surprising amount of office buildings in Beverly Hills. I feel like it's a place where you have like a lot of like talent agencies, and it's pretty similar in here, where it seems like you have a lot of these like high-end businesses and high-end offices that are in this area. But I feel like the main thing in Rockford Hills and in the game is really Rodeo Drive, which isn't really all that interesting in game. I mean, you have like the Rodeo Drive type thing over here, but it's not really that interesting in game because you can't go into any of the stores. Like, it would be so cool to have a Rodeo Drive in game where you can actually like go into the stores, but you can't really do that. And then right here you have the Mount Zona Medical Center, which I'm pretty sure is based off of like the Mount Sinai or like Sinai Medical Centers in LA. And then heading a little bit further into Rockford Hills, you still have a lot of these kind of big buildings. It also is very close to downtown, which is just kind of weird because Beverly Hills is pretty far from downtown in real life. And then you have Rockford Plaza here, which is based off of the Beverly Center in Beverly Hills, and it does a pretty good job replicating that. Again, it just would be cool to have like the ability to go into some of these things because they are pretty cool buildings from the outside, but it would just be kind of nice to like be able to explore some of the interiors and actually like be involved in them, because just looking at them from the outside isn't all that interesting. Then going over here, this is like the Hollywood Boulevard area, and then you have like a lot of these really nice buildings over here. I think a lot of these are like based off of hotels, and then you have like the apartment buildings on the right, and kind of like this is like the Hollywood area, which we're gonna be going to as probably one of the last neighborhoods, because I know a lot about Hollywood, and I think it's probably like the most interesting neighborhood in the actual game. And I think, it is probably a lot more interesting than East LA, which is probably less interesting. And then right here you have like Chateau Marmont, which is a pretty important and interesting hotel in LA. And then there's somehow a police chase behind me while I was going and visiting this area. But this is like the very edge of like the Sunset Strip in LA. So like this whole area right here is all like the Sunset Strip. And then you have Chateau Marmont, which is like at the very end. This is a place where like a lot of celebrities are, and they kind of just hang out here. And the rooms in there are like full rooms. Like you're not getting just a regular hotel room. You have like a full like suite or apartment in the hotel. It's kind of like a really interesting hotel that I definitely have to go to sometime. And then going back down this way, you're kind of like on the Sunset Strip here, but they don't really have like the full Sunset Strip things like right here. You just kind of have to go a little bit further down. And this is like the main Sunset Strip area where you have like this train area, which is a thing in real life. This is right by like the David Dobrik's area, where like David Dobrik has his pizza shop here. And this area honestly is probably one of the worst parts of LA. You have all these billboards and all these people like Netflix, they just promote hella stuff here. And then there's all these like buildings, and this area is really just not that interesting to me in real life. And in game, it also kind of sucks just because they're trying to promote so much stuff, and there's just not really that much interesting things going on here. Although they did replicate it pretty well in the game, because you have like the Comedy Store, you have Tequila La La La, which is Whiskey A Go Go in real life, and they did a really good job of replicating all these things because this is very similar to what they look like in real life. Just a little bit south of this street, you have this building to the right here, which is actually where the Epsilon program is, and this is based off of a building that the Church of Scientology has. This is a little bit further to the east, like it's not really in this area in real life, it's more in like the East Hollywood area, but it actually is basically the exact same thing as the building in real life. And it is kind of crazy that Rockstar went after Scientology, because Scientology is very litigious and they kind of like take down anything that looks like them or puts them in a bad light. So it kind of just is funny that Rockstar was able to parody them in the actual game itself. In this area, I feel like this is like where Michael actually lives, Richmond, and Richmond really isn't that interesting to me. I feel like it's just so boring. It's just like Beverly Hills, and like it's these super nice houses, but like nice houses in the game don't actually like amount to that much in the game, and they're not like all that interesting. But I really do like this Epsilon program building. I mean, it does just look exactly like this building does in real life. Also in this area, you do have this street right here, which actually has SACMA, which is like basically a parody of LACMA, which is kind of like a weird area. I just is kind of weird that there is no like Grove area or anywhere that's like in the middle of LA, and you kind of have LACMA, which is like normally the middle of LA thing. It's kind of like put into a whole different area. I mean, it is a very important area in the actual game. Like I feel like it's a pretty iconic LA landmark, and just kind of weird that they put it in a completely different spot. And then you have like this, which is kind of based on like Earth Cafe, which is a cafe in LA that's kind of like high end and for all the cool people. And then you have this area right here, which is kind of like also an interesting area in Beverly Hills, where they kind of have an area that's like only for pedestrians that you can walk through, that kind of like looks like Italian. It is just a weird thing that would only happen in Beverly Hills. And then you have this like Main Street, which is also something in Beverly Hills. And then you have like the Beverly Hills Courthouse on the right here, which is the Rockford Hills Courthouse as well. So they are basically just exactly like real life. There are so many things that are just so similar to what they actually look like in real life. I then wanted to go downtown for a bit, but we're going to be skipping through downtown to go down to South LA first. But we do just pass through these places. You have this huge Arcadius building right there, and then you also have the Daily Globe on the right. These are relatively similar to the buildings in downtown, but I don't think any of them are based off of anything specific in downtown LA, unless I just don't remember any of these places. But they all are like kind of cool looking. I mean, there's just not that much going on in downtown LA. You just have these huge buildings that are run by these kind of massive companies like Arcadius here, and just have a lot of people in them. You also have a lot of these like parking garages down here as well, and then you have like random buildings like here. This is Cafe Redemption, I think is what it said there. And it's like, it's kind of funny in downtown LA where you have these like huge buildings, and then there's some things that are just like normal buildings right next to a huge building. It's kind of like a weird thing in LA why they don't just have like a ton of huge buildings. Downtown LA is a little bit weird though. It doesn't really feel like a downtown as in you would have in like New York or like a lot of other big cities. It really feels like downtown LA is one of the least interesting parts of the entire thing. And then this thing to the left here is a thing that's actually in downtown LA. I'm not 100% sure about it. And then you have the construction building that has been going on for a long time. There actually is like two buildings in downtown LA that basically have been going on for this amount of time and like haven't been built, and now they're like abandoned, and they're like graffiti towers, and they're right by the train station there. So I guess there could be some sort of a reference to that, but of course the building just hasn't been finished because it's part of actual missions, and they can't just change it up to fit those missions now, because if it was a real building it would kind of not work with those missions that actually take part in that one. But it is kind of funny that there is like a real two buildings that are exactly like that building and haven't been finished for like over 10 years by this point. So it's kind of like an ironic thing that they had an unfinished building, and in real life the exact same thing happened. And now heading into South LA, I mean, South LA in the game is like relatively similar to South LA. They kind of just like mashed a bunch of things together, because South LA is way bigger than this in real life. Like South LA in the game is like 4 or 5 different blocks. So they kind of had to merge a bunch of things into this kind of small area. Like you have a lot of the industrial things, but that is a more East LA thing than like a South LA thing. Although there are industrial things in South LA here. I mean, here's like a steel mill, which is kind of cool. I mean, it's kind of just like an interesting thing. And then you have the Maze Bank Arena, which is based off of the Forum, which is in like Inglewood. So there are a lot of things that like somewhat are relatively similar to this area, but like Maze Bank Arena is just kind of an interesting thing to me that there's no like football stadium in LA either in the game, or in Los Santos in the game, because there is like a football stadium there in real life, but like the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, the one with USC, would have actually been there during the making of this game, and I feel like would have made a little bit more sense as like an LA landmark. SoFi Stadium is like an LA landmark now, but it wasn't there during the game's actual production, so like of course it couldn't be there. But they kind of just like crammed a bunch of things in this area. Like Maze Bank Arena is technically like in Inglewood, which would be kind of far away from this, but they kind of just all squished it together. And it's also right by the airport here, which it is kind of close to in real life. And now we'll head over to the airport area. This has got to be one of the worst places in the entire game. I feel like this is one of my most hated places in real life and in the game. I mean, in the game, it's not as bad. Like, it's kind of just like a normal airport, but it is just so funny how bad LAX is as an airport. And in game, they basically replicate the exact same thing, this annoying experience of LAX, except LAX would have like 30 cars here and you can't move and you're stuck in the horseshoe for like 10 minutes. LAX easily is one of the worst airports in the entire world. It just doesn't make sense how they set it up, and because there's no public transit, you just can't do anything but get in a car or get in an Uber, and it is the worst and most hateful place in the entire world. I hate it. It's a nightmare. It is the worst airport in the entire world, and just seeing this brings back bad memories. And then you have like kind of the parking structure here, which there is a bunch of parking structures in the middle of it, and then you also have like the I don't know what it's called, the little sculpture there, which is also there, and then like LSIA, which is based off of LAX, and like the whole letters there. There are a bunch of things that kind of like remind you of that area, but it's also like by the Marina del Rey area. This is just kind of like a whole mismatch of a bunch of different places, and it kind of works. Like, it kind of works to have like this weird area right by the airport, but I just feel like it's very boring in the actual game. You're just underneath all these highways, and there's just not really that much going on in the actual airport area. Like, you can't even really see things. It's kind of just like this area where there's not much going on, and like not even anything to see. Like, at least you can see some things in other areas, even if there's not much in terms of like actual gameplay wise. I accidentally stole this car from a dude because my other car got totaled, but I do want to go into the LA River here. So this is the Los Santos River in game, probably one of the more iconic locations in real life. There are a lot of different bridges crossing it, and it is just a pretty iconic location because there are so many movies that have taken place on the LA River, and they basically recreated it in GTA, where they had a couple missions where you go down and you drive on the river like they do in a lot of the movies. So it's just a pretty cool place. I feel like this is a good reference to like a lot of the old cinema where they had, you know, people driving in like police chases like I'm having here on the LA River. Just a really cool spot, and I think a really good like addition to the actual game. But of course it is just an iconic location, so they would have had to put it in the actual game. And now heading actually into the South Los Santos area, I feel like they did a good job of like relatively representing this area. It's kind of hard to take a lot of like South Los Angeles and put it into one area, but I feel like they did a good enough job of like representing kind of the housing that's in this area, where you have a lot of single family homes, and these areas are often a little bit more sketchy, and you have like some of the housing projects over here that don't really feel all that safe. You have like the Grove Street area right here. I think this is supposed to be Grove Street, or this is the Ballas territory in GTA 5. I know there's supposed to be like something that's supposed to be like Grove Street. I think this is the Ballas one, because this is where you do the deal with Trevor and Franklin when they come to this area. And this area isn't really all that interesting. I feel like there are a little bit more in terms of like gang territory in this area, and I feel like the gangs in this area are pretty interesting, where you have the families and the Ballas. I don't know if there may be any other like major gangs in GTA 5. Like, I would assume there actually are other gangs in GTA 5. Like, I know there are other gangs in GTA 5, but I just wonder if there are any other ones that have like a big presence in the actual game. But visiting this area, there's really just not that much going on. Like, it is kind of a cool area, and you do have like the train going through here as well, which the train is actually, I guess, kind of a pretty important thing in this area. There is like public transit going throughout all of South Los Angeles, and that's where they say some of the sketchiest areas of public transit are when you're going through South Los Angeles, which does make a lot of sense. And this area is just, you know, you have a little bit of these like back alleys, but it's mainly just like single family homes, and then you have some like the housing projects. There really isn't that much going on. I really haven't spent a ton of time in South Los Angeles, which makes a lot of sense. So I mean, I don't really like know what it would look like, but I feel like this relatively does a good job of kind of representing that area, because there are just all of these homes are just exactly what they would look like in this area, because LA just has so many of these like weird single family homes that are just way too small for what they should be. Instead of like putting up these apartment buildings, they're kind of all over like the north side of LA. All over South LA is all these like single family homes, just like the one seen here. I also think, again, this is where part of like Rockstar's game design kind of lets down this area, because this area really isn't as developed in real life. Like, there aren't a lot of super tall buildings in this area. I guess if you said like historic South Central, that's like relatively close to downtown, but I feel like a lot of these areas are a little bit further past that way, that they're kind of like taking inspiration from this area, and they're not really like close to downtown or close to any of these large buildings, I guess, again, except for historic South Central. So I guess there is some in here, but it's kind of just like these buildings, and it's like a lot of Hispanic people in these areas that used to be, you know, used to be a lot of these African American people, but now it's like more Hispanic people. And then in this area, of course, that's Franklin's house right there. And then you have a lot of liquor stores in this area, which I think is also a pretty interesting thing in game. I feel like they did a good job of this, where it is like a confirmed fact that like in poor neighborhoods, they have a lot more like liquor stores and things that are kind of like preying on the minority people. And it's kind of like a poverty trap is what they say, where it's like people go and they buy lottery tickets or they buy alcohol, and they kind of are like forced into these bad things because they have nothing good in the neighborhood to kind of like advance and go up a level, because you're kind of just forced in this level to only do the things that are only there for, you know, poorer people. And I think they did a good job of like showing that this area is very similar to that. And then you also, of course, have the Vanilla Unicorn, but this is more in like the arts district-y area of South Los Angeles, because it's way more toward the north and towards downtown. And now we go over to the bridge area. So this is supposed to be like Long Beach. I believe this is called Terminal Island in real life. I don't really know what it's called in the actual game, but this is an actual bridge. But the thing is, the bridge is so far away from the airport. Like, this was, again, another thing that just seems a little bit out of place here, because the port is a lot further away in actual Los Angeles compared to this area. But it is a really cool bridge here. I do think this bridge in real life is actually like kind of an interesting thing, because it goes over like actual land here and in the port as well. And the port, I feel like, is a little bit kind of shafted in real life, because I mean, it does have cool things going on in the port, and there are a couple missions here, because I believe Floyd is what his name is, Wade's cousin, works at the port in the actual game. But I think the one interesting thing about the port in real life is that Long Beach is a huge city, and Long Beach basically is all built around the port here. And there's really nothing here that would show that there's like any city around the port, because I guess they had to condense it so much that you can't really have a city around the port if there isn't like a ton of land around the city where there's like a whole different area between the city and downtown. Because the city is so close to the actual port itself here, you can't really have like an area like Long Beach, and instead you can kind of have an area that's just dedicated to the port. So they kind of like shafted Long Beach here, because Long Beach is like relatively an interesting city, but I don't really think it's interesting enough to like really have a reservation in this video. Like, it's really not that important in like LA itself, LA proper itself. And I would assume most people that like visit LA as like a tourist, you don't ever think about Long Beach as a city. And it's like, it does have a lot of people in. I think there's like at least 400,000 or 500,000 people that live in Long Beach, and it's just not shown in the entire game. But this area, I mean, is relatively cool. It's where all the stuff gets shipped into, and it is probably a pretty important thing in the actual game, where it's like a port, especially the port in Los Angeles, is like one of the most important things in Los Angeles itself. I think the majority of like the US's cargo goes through the Los Angeles port, especially the stuff from like East Asia, from like China and Japan. It all comes through Los Angeles. And I think like Los Angeles and Oakland. So it's one of the biggest ports in the entire world. So it does make sense to have a lot of different space dedicated to the port. But I feel like in game, there's just not really that much going on here, while they could have had a lot more things going on here. Like, it would be pretty interesting to like work as like a port worker, or like have something else going on here, but there's just not really that many things interesting in the actual like single player mode that would make the port like an interesting thing to visit. It kind of just is like a port that's going on, you know, maybe some people are working here, but it also doesn't really feel like a busy place. Like, you kind of visit around here, and it's not like there's a ton of people working at the port. Like, yes, there are of course like guards and other people working at the port, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of like port workers. Maybe I visited on a Sunday or a Saturday, because some of the port workers, they have like the best unions in the entire world, so they can basically just charge whatever they want to the people that they have to bring the cargo in for. So maybe I came here on a Saturday and they weren't working during this time period, but it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of people actually working at the port, which would be a really cool thing to see in something like GTA 6, because Miami also is a pretty important port city. And then visiting the port here, you have the Port Authority, and you can see that it seems like a lot of goods flow in and out of the port here, where you have like trains coming in. So if there's anything that needs to be transported through a train, it can get out of here. But again, it just doesn't really feel like a real place, because you don't have that many people working at the Port Authority. Like, you'd assume that there'd at least be more people at the thing, like maybe, you know, unloading cargo containers or like having things going on, but it just doesn't really feel like anyone actually works here. And I do think that makes it a little bit less interesting. It's so weird, because I've been seeing all these things on like Twitter and just people talking about it, and GTA 5 really does feel like an empty shell of a game. Like, it is a very cool game, and it's definitely a great game, but there are just so many like weird areas that just don't really feel alive, at least when you compare it to some of the other games in the GTA series, even like GTA 4, where I feel like you have a lot more places that feel a lot more alive. And when GTA 5, it's like a full step up in hardware, and these places, they feel so much bigger, but at the same time they feel so much more empty when you actually visit them. Like, I'm visiting them and there's not anyone working in the cargo thing here, there's no one, you know, moving anything here. It just feels empty and feels kind of like, I don't know, like backrooms-y in a way, where there's just like, it's a liminal space where nothing's going on. Even though there is a simulation of the world here, it just doesn't really feel all that realistic, which is just a really interesting thing. And it kind of gives GTA 5 this weird vibe where it feels realistic, but at the same time, it just doesn't feel realistic. And then now heading into the East LA area, this area in the game is actually just essentially all industry, and it's very similar to that in real life, where in East LA in real life there is just a lot of industry in that area, and this is where you have like all the warehouses and just, you know, people doing industry. And this is also where the air quality is often the worst in LA, because you just have all these industries making stuff and just creating things, and then they're just putting stuff into the air and polluting the air. But in the actual game, I feel like, again, this doesn't really feel like all that interesting of an area. It's kind of just an area with a bunch of industry. There doesn't seem to be a ton of people walking around this, but again, this at least does make a little bit more sense, because of course people aren't really gonna be walking around the industry area. They're getting in, they're getting their jobs, they're parking their car at the job, and then they're working in the factory, and then they're immediately leaving that area as soon as they're done with their job. So right next to this area is El Burro Heights, which is basically where all these oil derricks are. And the oil derricks are actually a pretty interesting thing, because Los Angeles used to have a bunch of oil derricks in the city. It was one of the highest oil producing places in the entire country, and essentially they're all gone now. So like this actually isn't like a real thing, but it's kind of like making a play on some of the older areas of Los Angeles's history. So they used to have a ton of oil derricks, and now there are still some of them in Los Angeles proper itself, but in Los Angeles they're basically like all covered up. So there are like oil derricks in certain parts of LA that are like covered up, and you'd never know that there's an oil derrick there in certain areas, which just is a really interesting thing. And it's like a weird fact that you can say to people when visiting LA, that there are a bunch of oil derricks that are just covered up in certain areas. You can probably search them up and find out where they are. I think there's one that's like next to a high school, and it's like next to a high school they had to cover it up like in, I think it's in Beverly Hills, in the Beverly Center. I think that's also why it has kind of like a weird shape, because there were like oil derricks that potentially are still pumping oil. I don't know if they still are to this day, but there are a bunch of like covered up ones in LA, because no one wants to see an oil derrick. An oil derrick is an absolutely like weird thing that you wouldn't want to see during your daily commute. So like I understand why they did eventually get rid of them. And then heading into El Burro Heights itself, it's kind of like a more rundown area. It doesn't really seem to be all that amazing. It's kind of like working class areas, and it kind of reminds me of a lot of like the Heights neighborhoods that are right around downtown LA. It's like northeast Los Angeles. You have a lot of these right here. They're kind of like Lincoln Heights. I mean, I don't think this is Lincoln Heights, because that's a little bit in different area, but still it's like kind of like that area in northeast Los Angeles where there are a lot of neighborhoods like this, and it's a lot of people living in these single family houses. And you have the goat Lester, who lives here as well, who is just one of the greatest characters in fiction ever. But this area is just, I don't know, it's kind of an interesting place to visit, but there's not really that much going on that makes it like a super cool place, and it's kind of just like, I don't know, a filler place that you can go visit. And now finally I wanted to return to downtown now that we've kind of explored all around downtown on the south side, and visit downtown itself and just see how it looks in game. I mean, there are much taller buildings in downtown than there are in Little Seoul here in game, and I think downtown is a pretty interesting place to go visit. Of course, you do have that dilapidated building that we checked out earlier, and then from that area you can see like a lot of these tall buildings, like the Maze Bank Tower, which is based on the US Bank Tower in Los Angeles, which is the tallest building in Los Angeles. I guess technically there's one that's like technically taller now, which is called the One Wilshire, which isn't really taller because it's like a spire. And then you have this, I believe it's a hotel here. This is where they do like the GTA advertising. It's where they did like Franklin, Trevor, and Michael, and they have like the advertising there. They also did the GTA 4 one there as well. So it's pretty cool that they have a place that they have specifically advertised their games in the actual game itself. I like that's a really cool thing. And then visiting downtown LA here, I mean, this is kind of what it looks like in real life. It looks very similar to real life, where you kind of have this like art deco-y slash like 30s architecture in downtown. Like a lot of it kind of just looks the same and looks kind of pretty cool. I mean, I feel like it would be nicer to have like a more similar style of architecture throughout the entire city, but there are just so many weird pockets of LA that have just random architecture here. And then just kind of like visiting this area, you also have, I think this is supposed to be the Roosevelt Hotel, but there's a bunch of these like hotels in downtown. They're all pretty similar to this. And you have like this courtroom here as well. And then, I don't know, it's just kind of like a bunch of big buildings in this area. And then you have right here to the left is like Pershing Square, which we'll be checking out even later. But it's kind of like a lot of these like rundown places that kind of feel like very 1930s-esque, because that's when a lot of them got built, and then they just haven't been destroyed or removed since then, and now they kind of like feel like a lot more old-timey and a lot more like not as interesting. And then there's certain of these areas, this is more like the arts district-y area, and this area is definitely a little bit different in real life. There's not really that much about it here. It's kind of just like warehousey, but like the art district area, you have like a lot of these like warehouses and a lot of these lofts, and then you have like Skid Row is right next to it. And then from the arts district on, you have a lot of these really cool bridges that go into East Los Angeles, which is pretty cool. You know, it's kind of like an interesting area. But yeah, this is kind of the area that's more arts district-y / like more eastern side of downtown. And then right under this bridge, you have the homeless encampment. And personally, I think it would be a really interesting idea to tackle in Miami or in Vice City, to have like some sort of homeless encampment and some sort of like way to kind of empathize with the homeless people here. Maybe you get someone off their feet and stop being homeless, or maybe, you know, someone you know becomes a homeless person and then you have some sort of an arc with them. I just think that would be a really cool thing, especially in America when like homelessness has become a big problem with a lot of people, because a lot of people have gotten hooked on drugs and become homeless from that. It would just be a really interesting way to like empathize with these people and, you know, just respond to people that you don't really get to encounter in real life. And in at least a video game, you can empathize with these people and, you know, maybe make friends with one of them without having the actual like danger that you'd have in real life, you know, hanging out with homeless people, just because it is going to be a little bit more dangerous. And then this is a pretty cool area here. This kind of reminds me of like the arts district and the toy district, where they just have some of these things that we can go down and there's like a lot of different people selling things. I guess it could be like the fashion district as well, but it's kind of like this area. They're all kind of combined into one here. And then you also have the railroad, which is also very close to that area. I think there's also Union Station in that area as well. I don't know if there's actually Union Station in the game. I could be wrong, but I don't think it's actually in the game. But that would be a pretty cool thing to have in this area. And it just is kind of an interesting area to go around and visit, like especially in this eastern side where you have a lot of these homeless people and you just kind of have like not that much going on. It just feels a little bit more lively and it feels a little bit more lived in, realistic than some of the other places we visited in this video. And now I went down the actual business center of downtown, and there are a couple of like business areas in downtown Los Angeles that are kind of like this in Los Santos, so it is pretty good. They do a pretty good job of like kind of replicating that. I also do like this area where they have the overpass here. This is like specifically an area in real life that they kind of have replicated here. It's a pretty interesting spot. I feel like in real life, it just doesn't really make sense. Like all the downtown freeways in Los Angeles are just the absolute worst freeways of all time. And I feel like they do a pretty good job of like showing just the cluster that they have in downtown and just how it is the worst possible place to go in LA. I mean, that has got to be up there with LAX as the two worst places to go in LA. They just don't make any sense at all and need to be revitalized in some way because they're just so bad. And then visiting this downtown area, I don't know if this park is necessarily named anything specific in GTA, but it's based off of Pershing Square, which is like a real park in downtown LA. And, you know, I don't really think this park is all that interesting. It's also not really like a real park. It's kind of like this thing for like art going on in this area. I don't know, it's kind of like a weird area to visit in downtown. I just think downtown LA is kind of like a weird liminal space in its own right. It's kind of like these big buildings. It doesn't really feel like the downtown of any other city because the coolest things in LA are not happening in downtown LA, which is very sad because most other downtowns in other cities are at least, you know, maybe like a business capital of their city, or there's like other cool stuff going on there. And I feel like LA is just not either the business capital or there's not even that much cool stuff going on there. It just feels like kind of like weird and liminal, and like there's not much happening in real downtown LA. And in the game, it actually feels a lot more normal there because you go and visit and there are like people out on the street, they're doing things. It just feels more lived in than like real downtown LA does. And now leaving downtown Los Santos, we can go and visit this area that's like right underneath the bridge here, which is kind of like a weird area. I don't know if there's any like real life encounter for this area. I guess technically you could say this is also kind of the area of like the arts district and like the garment district and the fashion district and all those places, which I guess probably makes the most sense of like what this is because it's not necessarily past the freeway. It's like in between the freeway and downtown. So the most likely one I'd say is that area. It's kind of like the arts district Park here as well, and this is where Lester is. And I guess it does make sense because he lives in basically an abandoned art warehouse, art fashion area. So this is probably that area as well. I just don't really know if there's any like real life encounter for that, but this area is kind of cool. It just feels like industrial areas and then kind of like rebuilt into a new area where you have these like, oh, lofts here in this area right here. So yeah, it probably is that area east of LA, which is like the fashion district of downtown. And this area is kind of cool. Like in real life, I feel like it's a lot cooler because there's like real young people coming back and like revitalizing this area. In here, it feels a little bit more dingy and run down and not like it's gotten its spark back. But I feel like in real life, this area is just starting to feel a lot cooler and feel kind of more unique as a place to go live if you want to live in this area. And then now we head over, passing over the LA River and into the East Vinewood area. And you can see Vinewood in like kind of like the Capitol Records Tower or whatever it's called in the actual game here. But this area I think is pretty interesting because this is more like the hipstery area in real life. But the thing about East Vinewood is it doesn't really feel like East Hollywood here. Like East Hollywood is a lot more like Hollywood-ish, and this area feels a lot more like Echo Park or Silver Lake, which are even more east than the East Hollywood area. So it's kind of like named a little bit differently than it would be in real life. This is more like single family houses, which is more like the Los Feliz and like Echo Park and Silver Lake area where you do have a lot more single family houses, but it still feels really nice in this area. I mean, this area pretty much represents that area in the actual game. You have like a lot more trees here, and it's a lot more like, I don't know, like an actual neighborhood instead of just like a concrete jungle, which a lot of Los Santos is in the game, and a lot of Los Angeles is in real life. But now we head over the bridge again to go over to Mirror Park itself. So Mirror Park in the game is based off of Echo Park. So, you know, that does make a little bit of sense. Echo Park, Mirror Park, and, you know, it does relatively look like that. Like, Echo Park does have a great view of downtown. It is very close. It's very close to Dodger Stadium as well. And I feel like that would be a super cool place for the game to kind of make a play off of. Like, Dodger Stadium is a pretty important landmark in LA itself, and, like, having, like, a Dodgers team would be even cooler because I feel like the Dodgers are probably the most popular LA team. I'd say the Lakers are probably second, but the Dodgers is more, like, uniting over the entire city and uniting of like a lot more different cultural backgrounds between like the Lakers. The Lakers are also a good team, but I feel like the Lakers haven't really been all that great recently. So it would just be kind of cool to have like Dodger Stadium like on the hill there or in this area. But Mirror Park itself is basically the exact same thing as Echo Park in real life, where there's the Echo Park Lake here, and it's essentially just a 1-to-1 copy in the game. You also have a lot of these like strip malls here as well. They feel a little bit cooler than some of the strip malls in like West LA, and you have like kind of these cool areas and like these cool shops in this area in real life. So they do a pretty good job of like replicating this area, but I would assume if they did a game in 2026, there would be way more of this area represented in game, because I feel like this area has really come up and been like a much cooler place in the last couple of years, where Silver Lake has become like one of those like TikTok things, very similar to Venice, where it's like TikTok has like Silver Lake in Venice as like these two like stereotypes of different types of people, where Silver Lake is where all like the alt people are, and where all the people who think they're cool and they're transplants, they move to LA and they live in these areas. So it is a pretty interesting area, and I feel like it's a lot more like culturally relevant in 2026 than it was in like 2013 when the game actually came out. So if they made a GTA 8 in this location, this area would probably be a little bit more built out. It's also pretty interesting that they have like new buildings in this area, because I don't know if they're like necessarily building anything new in this area or they had like a lot of new developments, but it just seems kind of weird. I feel like a lot of LA has been built in like the 80s or the 90s, and there wasn't really like a ton of like actual new developments like this area here in game in real life. I mean, maybe there was. I mean, I wasn't in LA in 2013 and checking it out to see if there's anything similar to this, but it just does seem kind of interesting that they have like new developments in Los Santos and not really in real life. Next up, we have the Mirror Park and the Mirror Park Lake specifically, and this is a pretty cool area. It is exactly essentially the Echo Park Lake that we have in real life in Echo Park itself. Like, this is essentially the exact same thing. You have pretty solid dimensions. You also have that island in the middle with the bridge going over to the island. Then you have these two buildings here, which are essentially the exact same building. So it is a pretty one-to-one recreation. It's kind of a weird one to be like a one-to-one recreation, because they didn't recreate any of the neighborhood here, but to have like the actual Echo Park Lake in the game is pretty cool. There's also like a radio station for Echo Park or Mirror Park in the actual actual game, and it's more like hipstery. So they did do a good job of like kind of capturing the hipstery vibe of this area, even in 2013 before it was like a full-on hipster area. But in general, I feel like it's a pretty reasonably close enough thing. You also can see from downtown all the way to downtown in Echo Park itself. So I feel like it does a pretty good job of kind of capturing that and having like all the people running around and sitting around it. That's also kind of what happens in real life. Although in real life, I feel like it's a lot more interesting because you have like the swan boats and you have other things you can do in this area instead of just like walking around. You can't actually do anything in GTA in the game. And now we leave the Mirror Park area and finally head into Vinewood itself. I think Vinewood is a pretty interesting place to go visit in the game because there are kind of a lot of things going on here. I think this is like the Department of Water and Power in real life, and they kind of took this building to make the police station here in Vinewood, which is kind of a cool thing. And then you also have the Capitol Records Tower, which I don't know what it's technically called in game, but this very much looks like the Capitol Records Tower, almost 1-to-1. So that is a pretty cool landmark. And I think that's one of the more iconic landmarks in LA. It's also kind of funny when you actually visit the Capitol Records Tower itself. It really isn't all that interesting in real life. Like, it's way shorter than you'd expect. It's only like 13 floors tall, and you visit in real life and you're like, wow, this is just kind of like a normal building, especially when you compare it to a lot of the buildings around it. They're all super tall as well. But you know, this area relatively reminds me of Hollywood. I feel like it is a little bit more built up than Hollywood itself actually is. I feel like Hollywood in real life is more like a lot of these apartment buildings that are like 5 stories tall, that are like all the new build apartment buildings. Like, that's kind of what Hollywood's like instead of like these big buildings here. This feels a little bit more built up than Hollywood actually is in real life, but I do think they did a good job of kind of representing this area of Hollywood. You also have all these different boulevards going through Hollywood. Like, Hollywood has a bunch of these boulevards that kind of just like bisect it, where you can basically go from one side of Hollywood all the way to another just on a very straight path. And even this area here, this kind of feels like the more like suburban-y area of Hollywood, kind of away from like Hollywood Boulevard itself, or like Vinewood Boulevard in game. This is like relatively similar to what it looks like. I do feel like this area in real life is like less commercial and it's more like just apartment buildings everywhere, instead of like having all these stores here. All the stores in Hollywood are kind of on the main boulevard or like on one of these side boulevards that kind of goes through it. So it is kind of weird to see some of the other stores here, but again, they kind of have to spread out the stores to be everywhere. This Singleton's area is a pretty interesting one because it seems like it's based off a real life thing, but I really don't know where that would be in Hollywood. I mean, maybe I haven't explored Hollywood enough, but I've really never seen anything like that. And then this area right here is supposed to be like one of the big intersections, but the intersections in Vinewood compared to Hollywood in real life are a little bit weird because they kind of like moved a lot of the big landmarks in Hollywood to different areas. Like here you have like the Roosevelt Hotel, which is technically a little bit closer to like this area right here where it's like the Chinese theater, but it's like the Chinese theater is in a different area than it would be in real life. It's way more to the left and like way more to these other things. And then here, I'm assuming that's like either the Pantages Theaters or the El Capitan Theater, which is like all in downtown Hollywood. And then you have like all these other buildings. I mean, Hollywood is one of the weirdest places to go visit because you just have the weirdest businesses that are still open on Hollywood Boulevard. And Hollywood Boulevard really just needs to be closed down and just be a full pedestrian area, because the fact that they allow cars to be there and just allow them to be on the Walk of Fame just really doesn't make it that interesting of an area to go walk around. Like, you have the Walk of Fame here. If you just allow this to be an only walking boulevard, it would be so much cooler to visit as a tourist, and it would just kind of be like a European thing in America. But there really isn't that much going on in this area like in real life. They also have like the Ripley's Believe It or Not. These are also a lot closer to the actual like Chinese theater. Like, same thing with here, the Wax Museum. These are all right next to the actual Chinese theater. But the thing is, the Walk of Fame in game really isn't that long. In real life, it is a huge stretch. It's probably like 8 or 9 blocks just across Hollywood. Like, again, they probably don't have as many stars that they can do here, but it's like we're all the way to Chateau Marmont. It's like 3 blocks in the actual game. It's just kind of crazy how much smaller it is and how they had to kind of really condense it down and put all the cool things just in one area, which really doesn't really feel like the actual Hollywood Walk of Fame, because the Hollywood Walk of Fame, there's not that much cool stuff to do when you're actually like walking on it. It is one of the worst tourist attractions in the entire world to go to because there's just genuinely nothing cool to do there. And then we have this street, which is another one of these straight streets. I think this is supposed to be either Sunset Boulevard or Santa Monica Boulevard. This area is a little bit more suburban, which does feel a little bit weird. I feel like they should have moved all these suburban houses to the one at the very end and then moved those those shops and buildings to this one, just because the Sunset area I feel like is a little bit more like there's shops going on and there's actual things going on in those areas, and this just feels a little bit more suburban and more like there's just, I don't know, just kind of things going on. But there are a lot of these strip malls in the Sunset Sunset area, so I guess that kind of makes sense. Again, they did have to kind of compress it all into an actual place, but I did think they did a pretty good job of kind of like representing the Hollywood area. I guess this would probably be Santa Monica Boulevard if you want to go down it, because Santa Monica is a little bit more built up than I feel like Sunset is in real life, but they do a pretty good job of kind of representing the Vinewood area and comparing it to Hollywood, because Hollywood really is not that interesting of a place to go visit, and I feel like in game it's not really that interesting of a place to go visit either. Like, of course, the Walk of Fame is like kind of like the cool area in real life and in the actual game, but the rest of it is kind of just a bunch of stores and a bunch of apartment buildings that most people aren't going to be like, oh my god, I really love to go to these stores and these apartment buildings that I can go anywhere else to and see them. Like, Hollywood is just really not an interesting place to go in real life, and neither is Vinewood in the game. It's kind of just a place to go and, you know, shop, or, you know, you can just live there as a full-time person. And finally, we're heading into the Vinewood Hills. Now we get to see where all the rich and famous people live, and we get to see basically all the last of the actual landmarks, because a lot of them are surprisingly in the Vinewood Hills themselves. I think even the most interesting one, which is the Vinewood sign, is also in the hills here, and that's also like real life. But the thing about the Vinewood sign compared to the Hollywood sign is the Vinewood sign is like weirdly hard to see everywhere else in the game, and like in real life it's so easy to see the Vinewood sign. But right here we have the Hollywood Bowl, which is pretty close to like Hollywood itself, and it's actually pretty closely represented in game to what it looks like in real life. I do think it's kind of funny that they have both the Hollywood Bowl and the Sisyphus Theater. So they have like the Vinewood Bowl and the Sisyphus Theater, which is like the Greek theater in real life, and they just don't really have that much going on here. It's really just like a set dressing place and a place to make it feel a little bit more realistic. The one cool thing about visiting like the Hollywood Bowl in real life is that you could actually go and kind of just explore around it if they don't have a concert there. So you could kind of just do this like Michael is doing in the game and kind of just explore around this area and just see what's going on. So I do think that's like a really cool thing you can do in real life. And, you know, as Michael, I was like, I have to go around and explore the Hollywood Bowl. And, you know, this area in the actual game is like relatively close to real life. I mean, in real life, there's probably way more seats than there are in the actual game, but they do kind of have these like box sections as well at the real Hollywood Bowl like they do in the Vinewood Bowl. But I just feel like there's not really that much use of this in game. But you do also have like the area where the stage is. Like, the stage is basically exactly the same. They just couldn't replicate, like, there's 20,000 seats at the Hollywood Bowl in real life, so they couldn't like fully replicate that in game. And then now going into the Vinewood Hills here, these houses seem relatively realistic. I mean, the Vinewood Hills are just extremely like not as curvy as they would be in real life. The Hollywood Hills, to like actually explore them and drive around, it is the worst experience in the entire world of driving this area. I did it one time and I was like, wow, this is just a pain in the ass if you're a tourist. But the one cool thing about this area in the actual game is that you can finally see the Vinewood sign here. And the thing is, again, like I said before, the Vinewood sign is way harder to see in the game and kind of in a weird spot in the game than it is in real life, because in real life it is like right above like the Hollywood Hills, and it's kind of like a lot easier to see from like Hollywood itself. And it's kind of weird that in the game they put it in this weird spot that is like so far away. It's also in real life to like the left side of the Griffith Observatory instead of the right side. So it's just kind of interesting in game they put it in this like such secluded area, even though there are like a lot of hills that you'd have to get up to in real life to go to the Hollywood sign. It just feels like a kind of weird area if you know where it actually is in real life, because it's a lot closer to civilization than you'd really think in real terms where it is. But I do feel like they did a pretty good job. I mean, it's not that hard to like kind of parody the Hollywood sign, and I think it's pretty easy to do a good job, and you get this pretty solid view from this area. So overall, they did a good job. But now, leaving this area, we're gonna go over to the Sisyphus Theater, which is also kind of in a weird spot. I mean, they kind of just moved around all these things and moved them into different areas. This is technically the Vinewood Park area, which is Griffith Park in real life. And Griffith Park also does have the Greek theater, so it's in the right spot. And this is where like the Griffith Observatory is in real life, which we'll be going to at the very end of this video, the observatory, because I feel like that's the last stop in any video here. But, you know, visiting this area itself, it's kind of very similar to the Vinewood Bowl. There's just really not that much going on. Although I do like the name the Sisyphus Theater instead of like the Greek theater. Like, Sisyphus is a pretty cool one to kind of reference here, but there's not really much going on at the Sisyphus Theater. It really just is kind of like a set dressing area that is honestly very similar to the Vinewood Bowl, at least in terms of like the setup here. And it just kind of makes it less interesting of a place, especially after you visited the Vinewood Bowl, and the Vinewood Bowl is a lot bigger. After leaving the theater, I then headed into the Vinewood Hills, where we can find Lake Vinewood, which is based off of the real-life Hollywood Reservoir, which is also called Lake Hollywood sometimes. And this is like a man-made reservoir where they basically keep a lot of the water for LA in this reservoir, I believe. And this road here is very similar to the one in real life. And the Hollywood Reservoir is actually a really interesting place in real life because it's right next to like the Clout House. So like a lot of people kind of go around and like walk around it, but a lot of people will go up into the Hollywood Hills to go and walk around the reservoir. And you have like all these rich people who have to let people access their reservoir because it's like a public park there. And just a very interesting place to go visit because you have to like go up and go into all these like windy routes to get all the way up to this reservoir, where there is some pretty cool walks, but it's just like all these rich people have to let these people park right by their house just because there's a reservoir there. And again, this is right by like the Clout House or the, you know, Hype House, whatever you want to call it. So it's where all those people that live in that like classic Hollywood mansion really want to live. So it's just kind of funny that those people have to let just normal people go up and visit the reservoir there. And then this road here is very similar to the one in real life that kind of goes around the reservoir there. And you can get some of the best views in the actual game by going and visiting this area. I mean, just looking down from Lake Vinewood into the rest of the game is just absolutely amazing from this area. And finally, we now get to go into the Vinewood Hills themselves. And, you know, it's kind of just a bunch of really nice houses. There's not really that much going on. Of course, Franklin does live up here. I don't really know what house he lives in. I don't know. I haven't really paid that much attention to GTA 5, but he does live in one of these houses up here. I don't think it's in this area. I think it's more in the middle of the Vinewood Hills here. But I do think this is a pretty cool area to go and kind of explore. Again, these roads aren't as windy as they are in real life. In real life, you have to hit these hairpin turns and like everyone's stopping and going like 10 miles an hour. And in game, it's a lot easier to drive down them because it's a game. It would not be fun to go down hairpin turns, especially when you're going like 80 miles an hour and you just have to crash into the wall. And it's like even navigating it in game is kind of hard enough as is when you're going like 80 miles an hour. So in game, I feel like they do a good job of kind of like compromising between allowing you to go fast and making it relatively realistic to real life. But this area, in my opinion, is not all that interesting to go visit around. It's just a lot of really nice houses and really nice cars. And last but not least, we're finally heading up to the Galileo Observatory, which is based off of the Griffith Observatory in real life. And I don't actually think there's any way to drive to the Griffith Observatory in real life. Like technically like buses can. And there also is this tunnel here. So this is like the turnoff right before the Griffith Observatory, which is kind of cool that they have like this specific tunnel. I think it's a famous tunnel called like the Mount Hollywood Tunnel. Not 100% sure on that, but it's pretty cool that they have that in real life. And then finally gain over to the Galileo Observatory. This is one of the other interesting places in the game because essentially it's a one-to-one recreation in real life. Like all this very much looks the same. You kind of have this like courtyard out here in the front. You have these like big statues and pillars that kind of people are looking at, and then you have the main observatory itself. And I feel like it is one of the more interesting places to have like a one-to-one replica in the game. Like personally, I do think it makes a lot more sense for this to have a one-to-one replication than something like the Getty Center, but it is just a pretty good close recreation of what this looks like in real life. And this also has a mission that starts here. So I do think this is probably one of the more realistic places in the entire game because it kind of just feels up there in the park here. And then you do get these amazing views of Los Angeles in real life and of Los Santos in the game. And I feel like this is one of the places that is like basically recreated one-to-one in the actual game because it's so similar to what it looks like in real life. Although again, the views are a lot different because this is a video game. In real life, everything's kind of spread out a little bit further, but essentially it's a one-to-one recreation in real life. Like all these things are kind of at the Griffith Observatory itself and at the Galileo Observatory here. So this is where we're going to end our video in Los Santos. Thank you guys for watching this video. It was really cool to explore San Andreas in the GTA 5 map.